Chapter 2798. Do it. Keep him busy. At the same time, Baijin bellowed out. Light surged from his body as he unleashed all his strength. He turned into a sword and shot towards Jianqin. Although he had lost his right arm, he was still an invincible divine king after all. If he were in the saint's world, he would never be weaker than first heavenly layer infinite primes. As a result, even without his right arm, he could still unleash great battle prowess. Beside Baijin, the vice city lords, 36 lords, and 108 kings all bellowed out. All of them attacked Jianqin with determination. They advanced courageously, and none of them retreated. This was because there was no room for them to retreat at this moment. Once they failed to retrieve the essence blood, they would end up in an extremely miserable state even if they managed to escape. They would be cursed by the entire clan and become sinners of the clan. They would live a life worse than death. At the very least, they would be able to leave behind a glorious name if they died here. Of course, most importantly, they needed to buy time for the people behind them so that they could flee and spread the news that a primordial realm expert had entered. When Baijin struck out, Jianqin's face changed. He could not help but look at the sky. His senses were extremely sharp, so he could clearly sense a profound and mysterious power crushing down on the surroundings. It was like a huge shackle that trapped Baijin tightly, preventing him from unleashing his full strength. The will of a grand exalt of the Wood Spirit clan. That was the thought that immediately crossed Jianqin's mind. None of the conversations between Baijin and the others could escape his ears. Even if they communicated secretly, Jianqin could hear them clearly. As a result, he knew that the Two-World Mountain was suppressing the Dark Star race. However, he had never thought that the suppression would be so great. They had only set foot within a few dozen kilometers of the Two-World Mountain range, which was so vast that it was not even close to the outskirts of the mountain range. If the Dark Star race could be suppressed so clearly even at the outskirts, just how terrifying would the suppression be once they entered the inner regions, or even the depths of the mountain range? While Jianqin was deep in thought, Baijin transformed into a sword and formed a huge sword beam that arrived in front of him. However, just as the sword light was about to pierce Jianqin's body, the space suddenly rippled. An invisible spatial barrier silently appeared, blocking the sword light. Even though Baijin's strength was suppressed, he had only just stepped into Two-World Mountain. The suppression wasn't that strong. Hence, even though his strength was affected, it wasn't that bad. He could still unleash a great amount of strength. However, he couldn't pass through the spatial barrier. Not only him, but even the 36 lords and the 108 kings could only cause ripples to appear on the surface of the barrier when their full-powered attacks hit it. To them, this thin layer of barrier was like an ordinary person facing an iron wall. It was unshakable. Law of space. Baijin's face changed drastically, and a sliver of despair appeared in his eyes. He could naturally tell that this was the laws of space at the primordial realm. A thin layer of the barrier was enough to render him helpless. Of course, this was not the most terrifying part. What truly made him despair was that before an expert who had comprehended the laws of space, any attempt to flee was foolish and laughable. He looked behind instinctively, and, as expected, a spatial barrier had appeared at the very back of the group as well, blocking all the divine kings who were about to flee. Many divine kings had already used their full strength to attack the spatial barrier. But no matter how they used their most powerful secret techniques and battle skills, they were unable to make the barrier budge at all. Some people even began to blow up their high-quality saint artifacts and supreme-quality saint artifacts. However, even with the powerful attacks from the explosions of several saint artifacts, all they managed to do was create a few ripples in the spatial barrier. They were still far from being able to break through. Everyone scatter and flee into the distance. This spatial barrier doesn't cover a large area. A divine king of the Darkstar clan called out from behind the group. As a result, all the divine kings scattered and fled in different directions. In the next moment, All the people who were escaping were in despair because they found that the spatial barrier was a circle and it had completely enveloped this area. It sealed the sky as a prison and drew a circle as a prison. All of them were trapped. By June, the 36 lords and the 108 kings had already stopped attacking. It was only at this moment that they truly understood just how powerful this outsider was. Just a single layer of space barrier was enough to render them helpless. This level of strength was not something they could contend against. Looking at Jianqin, who stood before them like nothing had happened, the 36 lords and the 108 kings were filled with anger and reluctance. There was undisguised shock as well. This was the first time they had heard of this, as well as the first time they had seen a primordial realm expert from the outside world. They knew extremely well that foreign cultivators could not be over 1,000 years old. It had taken them countless years to reach the divine king realm, yet now a primordial realm expert who was not even 1,000 years old had appeared. His cultivation speed deeply shocked all of them. At this moment, Baijin had already calmed down. He looked at the droplet of essence blood in Jianqin's hand and thought about what Jianqin had said before. His face became bitter, and he asked sternly, "Sir, have you specially come for that divine beast?" "However, the divine beast you've captured is like family to me. I never thought that your Darkstar clan would treat him like this." Jianqin's face became frosty as soon as he mentioned Siyu. He did not hide his intense killing intent at all. His gaze was fixed on Baijin as he asked coldly, "Let me ask you this. Does the 36 cities of the Darkstar race have a drop of divine beast blood essence? Is that important?" "No, it's no longer important. I admit that you are very powerful. You probably haven't just reached the primordial realm. However, it's impossible for you to save the divine beast from our Darkstar clan. This is because we have several dozen infinite primes in our Darkstar clan. The Hall Masters and Vice Hall Masters of the 10 Divine Halls have all reached the primordial realm many years ago. They're much more powerful than you." Chapter 2799. Jianqin stared at Baijin coldly. Even though Baijin did not state it clearly, Jianqin had already confirmed his guess from his expression and reaction. This immediately ignited his killing intent once again, making him restless. "A grand ceremony? You're still thinking about the grand ceremony? You've harmed my family, so don't even think about succeeding with your grand ceremony," Jianqin said coldly. The light in his eyes shone brightly as killing intent surged. The grand ceremony that the Darkstar race was about to undergo was an opportunity for every single member of the race to change their fate. Not only could they break free from the restraints of their cultivation, but they could also achieve their great wish of breaking free from their prison. All the Darkstar clansmen placed great importance on the grand ceremony. As a matter of fact, some of them even valued the grand ceremony more than their own lives. As a result, their faces all changed when they heard that Jianqin wanted to ruin the grand ceremony. The divine king of the Darkstar race, who originally felt respect for Jianqin, became furious, like a cat that had its tail stepped on. All of their fear was swept away, and they all glared at Jianqin furiously as they roared out viciously, "How dare you, cultivator from the outside world! If you dare to ruin our grand ceremony, our experts will definitely make you suffer a fate worse than death. Damned cultivators from the outside world. They really do harbor evil intentions. The great emperor shouldn't have let these cultivators from the outside world run amok in our territory. The cultivators from the outside world hiding in our territory should have been wiped out long ago. Look everyone. These cultivators from the outside world really do harbor ill intentions. They actually want to ruin our grand ceremony. They even want to save that divine beast. That divine beast is willing to sacrifice itself for our grand ceremony. That's the glory that divine beast has accumulated over its entire life." Jianqin's face became even colder when he heard the voices of these people. He seemed like a block of ice that had been frozen for 10,000 years. "Sir, why don't you listen to me? At this moment, the city lord of Dark Night, by Jean, pressed his hand down and stopped the voices behind him. He clasped his fist at Jianqin and said, "With your cultivation as a primordial realm expert, you are already an important figure in our clan. So why must you become an enemy? If you can take a step back, we can become friends, and our clan can provide you with various rare resources. We can even help you become a chaotic prime. And the key to turning an enemy into a friend is to be able to give up on that divine beast. That divine beast is crucial to the success rate of our tribe's grand ceremony, so it must be sacrificed." Jianqin coldly smiled when he heard that. He said, "I'll tell you the truth. If that divine beast dies, I will destroy the entire Darkstar race. Your entire Darkstar clan wants to sacrifice the divine beast so that you have a chance of breaking through to a higher realm of cultivation. I can also destroy your entire clan for that divine beast and make you pay for what you've done. Sir, do you really want to become enemies with our Darkstar race?" Baijin asked with a sunken face. "Ha ha ha. You Darkstar have captured my family and even want to kill them. I've only come to save my family, yet it's my fault in the end." With that, Jianqin suddenly clenched his hand at the space there. With that, the spatial barrier he had cast down in the surroundings suddenly shrank, going from 15 kilometers to 1.5 kilometers before shrinking to 300 meters. In the end, as the spatial barrier shrank, the several thousand divine king trapped inside were squeezed together like pancakes. They were unable to move at all. "You've harmed my family, so you must pay the price. Since your Darkstar race has already taken out so much essence blood, I'll make you pay a portion of it first," said Jianqin. He trapped the several thousand divine king with his spatial powers before taking them into the depths of the two-world mountain. What are you doing? Let us go." Some of the divine king called out in fear when they saw Jianqin heading deeper into the two-world mountain. It was as if being trapped in the depths of the two-world mountain was even more terrifying than dying to Jianqin's hands. He's taking us into the depths. This demon, this unpardonable demon, he's cursed him to die a horrible death. We have to kill all the cultivators of the outside world who remain in our territory. We have to kill them all. We can't let a single one of them go." Jianqin ignored their roars. He hurried along with the laws of space with astonishing speed. He traveled 5,000 kilometers in an instant, quickly making his way into the depths of the two-world mountain. The mist in the surroundings grew thicker and thicker. Along the way, he would leave behind an imprint of his soul from time to prevent himself from getting lost if he ventured too deep. Very soon, Jianqin returned to the depths of the two-world mountain. The journey that Jin Hong and the others had taken several months to complete took Jianqin only a few dozen seconds. This is the depths of the two-world mountain." Bai Jin's face was pale. He was filled with despair, but there was also shock and disbelief. This was because the distance from the outskirts of the two-world mountain to the depths was millions of kilometers. Every step along the way was filled with danger. The slightest carelessness could lead to death. Even a peak divine king would need over a month to travel such a long distance in such an environment. However, he had now arrived in the depths of the two-world mountain in a few dozen seconds. Bai Jin felt like he was dreaming. Everything seemed unreal. After arriving in the depths of the two-world mountain, Jianqin removed the restraints on the several thousand divine king as well. However, without any exception, all of their faces paled. Their eyes were filled with fear, as they had already recognized where they were. The depths. This is the depths. A divine king of the Darkstar clan stammered as his legs trembled. He was extremely frightened. The suppression in the depths of the two-world mountain became even greater. Some early divine kings had actually fallen to overgods from the suppression. There were even some mid-divine kings who were only able to unleash peak overgods from the suppression. Late divine kings had fallen to early divine kings. By Jin, the 36 rulers and the 108 kings were all experts who had reached the peak of divine king many years ago. but they were only able to unleash the strength of a mid-divine king now. In short, all of their cultivation had fallen by at least a level after entering the depths of the two-world mountain. Whether you can survive will depend on your own abilities. If you can escape, it'll be your fortune. Jianchen did not personally kill them. Instead, he vanished after saying that. Basically, the moment he vanished, the roars of beasts rang out from the depths of the mist. The ground began to tremble as a large group of life-devouring beasts made their way over. Moreover, it wasn't just in one direction. With the Dark Star tribe at the center, life-sucking beasts were roaring in all directions. Their voices were filled with excitement, and the trembling of the earth was a clear indication that the life-sucking beasts were approaching. Bai Jin seemed to think of something. He immediately called out to everyone, "Quick, quick, quick! Everyone, conceal your presences. The life-devouring beasts are extremely sensitive to our presences. We can't let any of it leak out. City Lord, what should we do? What else can we do? Run. Everyone run. This is the depths of the two-world mountain. This is our forbidden ground. You can't stay here unless you're at the primordial realm. Run outside. Everyone run outside." Bai Jin said frantically before immediately flying towards the outskirts of the two-world mountain. Chapter 2800. All the divine kings of the Dark Star race fled outside in a panic. All of them unleashed their full strength and used various secret techniques to increase their speed. It was extremely terrifying. The roars in the distance became clearer and clearer. They rang out endlessly, shaking up the surroundings. Many life-devouring beasts were approaching, causing the ground to tremble more and more violently. Jianchen did not go very far. He sat down on the crown of a large tree several dozen kilometers away. He stared at the divine kings of the Dark Star race coldly and emotionlessly. The depths of Two-World Mountain were fraught with danger to others, but he could come and go as he pleased. The only problem was that he had no sense of direction. It was very easy for him to get lost here, unable to find his way out. He had already expanded the senses of his soul. He could clearly see countless life-devouring beasts encircling the divine king of the Dark Star race in a huge encirclement. The scale of the life-devouring beast surprised Jianchen, who had stayed in the depths of Two-World Mountain for several months in the past and was used to seeing all sorts of beasts. This was because the life-devouring beasts he had seen in the past only numbered in the tens of thousands at most. However, there were over 1 million life-devouring beasts within the range of his soul. Who knew how many more were hurrying over from beyond the range of his soul? Jianchen actually had the misconception that Bai Jin's group had drawn over all the life-devouring beasts in Two-World Mountain. They were like a beacon in the night. No matter how far away the life-devouring beasts were, they would be able to discover them. The Grand Exalt of the Wood Spirit clan actually has such great enmity with the Grand Exalt of the Dark Star race. It's been so many years since he died, yet the forces he left behind are still so hostile towards the Dark Star race. Jianchen thought the senses of the life-devouring beasts towards the Dark Star race were just too great. Some of the life-devouring beasts that were only gods outside the range of his soul could pinpoint the exact location of the Dark Star race. This defied common sense, so it definitely had something to do with the Grand Exalt of the Wood Spirit clan. Help! Help! My legs! My legs! My legs are gone! Suddenly, a divine king of the Dark Star race who was flying close to the ground produced a panicked and terrified cry. His legs were disappearing at a visible rate. The portion that had disappeared turned into pure life force that fused with the ground below. There was no pain, no feeling. If he had not noticed it, he would not even know that his legs had dissolved. The god kings in the surroundings all shivered when they saw this. Their fear became even heavier, and they fled faster and faster. As for the god king whose legs had melted away, the melted part reached his waist very quickly before continuing upwards. Very soon, it reached his chest, neck, and head. In just a few seconds, the God King had evaporated into thin air. His entire body had been reduced to life energy that fused with the ground below. Apart from crying out in fear, he was unable to do anything else. Moreover, this was not the only case. Several dozen divine kings of the Darkstar race had completely dissolved. Some of the divine kings of the Darkstar race actually grew roots from their bodies. In the end, they became a huge plant that rooted themselves in the ground. They no longer bore any of the characteristics of a Darkstar race. Jianchen sat on the crown of the tree and saw all the changes that had happened to these people. Even with his mental fortitude, he shivered when he reached the end. Only now did he clearly understand just how terrifying Two World Mountain was. Its terror was mostly directed at the Darkstar race. It was much more lenient towards non-dark stars. Of course, he had also discovered something else. The divine kings of the Darkstar race who had died were all the weakest. The stronger they were, the stronger their resistance would be. However, as time went on, the bodies of some of the stronger divine kings of the Darkstar race gradually underwent various strange changes. However, no matter what happened, they could not escape death in the end. By Jin, the 36 lords and the 108 divine kings fled at the very front. What welcomed them was a swarm of life-devouring beasts that blotted out the sky. Their tiny bodies were quickly swallowed up by the huge life-devouring beasts. In the end, as the encirclement of the life-devouring beast shrank, all the divine kings of the Darkstar race were trapped. After a final struggle, all of them died here, including by Jin. Unlike cultivators in the outside world, the Darkstar race did not leave behind any corpses when they died in Two World Mountain. Even if their corpses did not enter the stomachs of the life-devouring beasts, they would be assimilated by the earth and become nutrients. After all the Darkstar race died, the life-devouring beasts gathered here lost their targets, so they all dispersed and returned to where they had come from. Jianchen watched everything from the crown of the tree. He used the senses of his soul to monitor every single Darkstar. Only after confirming that there were no more survivors did he stand up. He looked at the space ring in his hand that contained a droplet of essence blood as he sank into his thoughts. A while later, his eyes narrowed, and he vanished into thin air. When he reappeared, he had arrived near the territory of a primordial realm life-devouring beast. He concealed his presence with a mask and did not set foot in the territory of the primordial realm life-devouring beast. Afterwards, he slowly opened his hand, and by Jin's space ring sat there quietly. In the next moment, the space around his hand pulsed slightly, and the space ring immediately vanished. 100 kilometers away, a colossal life-devouring beast lay on the ground, snoring away. It gave off a tremendous presence. At this moment, the space 10 kilometers away from it twisted slightly, and a space ring appeared out of nowhere. It landed below a tree silently. The primordial realm life-devouring beast seemed to sense something. It raised its head and looked around. A smear of doubt appeared in its eyes, but it did not discover anything in the end. It lay on the ground and continued to sleep. Jianchen did not take away Siyu's essence blood because it had already been tainted with the presence of the Darkstar world. He could not guarantee that the experts of the Darkstar race would not be able to find the location of the essence blood through some secret technique, which was why he left it here. He did not touch the items in Bai Jin's space ring either. A complete space ring was right beside a primordial realm life-devouring beast. Even if the experts of the Darkstar race managed to find this place, they would probably only blame Bai Jin's death on the primordial realm life-devouring beast. Jianchen left the Two World Mountain. He returned to the territory of the Darkstar race easily through the imprint of his soul he had left behind. He could no longer use Gu Qi's identity, so he changed his identity and entered another large city of the Darkstar race with an extremely low profile. Afterwards, he left through a teleportation formation, heading to the royal capital. Chapter 2801. By the time Jianchen arrived in the royal capital of the Darkstar race through the teleportation formation, An entire day had already passed since the disturbance in Dark Knight City. A single day was enough for the entire Dark Star race to learn about what had happened in Dark Knight City. The Dark Star race had ruled the Dark Star realm for far too long. It had been so long that nearly everyone in the Dark Star race had formed the notion that they were superior to the outside world's cultivators. Furthermore, this notion had been deeply rooted in their minds, causing the majority of the Dark Star race to look down on the outside world's cultivators. However, that was the reality. There were many primordial realm experts in the Dark Star world, while cultivators of the outside world who had reached Divine King realm were rare. As a result, cultivators of the outside world were very weak in the eyes of the Dark Star race. They were existences of low status. But now, a cultivator from the outside world, who they thought was weak, had single-handedly turned Dark Knight City upside down. Even the 108 kings of Dark Knight City, who were equivalent to guardian gods, had been killed or injured. For the Dark Star clansmen who had never suffered a setback before, this was naturally extremely shocking. As a result, Dark Knight City immediately became the center of attention after the news spread. Many Dark Star clansmen had gathered in Dark Knight City through teleportation formations in the other 35 cities where the various races were resting in peace. Some of them had come to watch the show, while others had come to check the truth of the matter. In short, after a day of great change in Dark Knight City, the entire city's population had multiplied several times. However, the city lord, by Jing, the 36 lords, the 108 kings, and all the other experts had yet to return. A part of the city wall has collapsed, and a large number of structures in the city have been destroyed. I really never thought that the prosperous Dark Knight City would end up like this. Dark Knight City is the closest city to 100 Saints City. The leader of the 7th Hall has ordered the city to be turned over. Many cultivators of the outside world have been killed there. Dark Knight City has probably suffered revenge because of what happened to 100 Saints City. This doesn't necessarily have anything to do with 100 Saints City, as I heard that the cultivator of the outside world who turned Dark Knight City upside down was all alone. What? He dared to stand up to an entire city alone? That's impossible. If you don't believe me, you can ask the clansmen in Dark Knight City. Many people witnessed this with their own eyes. On the streets of Dark Knight City, similar discussions could be heard everywhere. But without exception, all the Dark Star clansmen who knew the details of the battle couldn't believe that a cultivator from the outside world could be so powerful that he could fight against the Dark Knight City Lord, 36 lords, and 108 kings alone. Although that martial artist from the outside world managed to escape in the end, this kind of strength was still shocking. As a matter of fact, some people even suspected that the foreign cultivator was a primordial realm expert in disguise. However, almost everyone in Dark Knight City rejected this theory. The city, Lord's Mansion of Anya City, had been sealed off, and no one was allowed to enter or leave. Inside the city Lord's Mansion, Manager Hong, who had stayed behind, had become the person with the highest status in the city Lord's Mansion when all the higher-ups of the city Lord's Mansion were present. However, at this moment, Manager Hong was bowing and standing respectfully in front of the 3 men in black. These 3 men in black were wearing the same uniform. However, on their chests, there was a vivid embroidered image of a majestic temple. Above the temple, there were 7 sharp swords hanging. The Divine Hall possessed supreme glory in the Dark Star clan because it was the symbol of the 10 Divine Halls. Only the people who belonged to the 10 Divine Halls would have such a symbol on their chests. The 7 swords above the Divine Hall represented that they came from the 7th Divine Hall. Among the 3 people from the 7th Hall, the person in the middle was in charge, while the other 2 seemed like attendants or guards. The person in the middle said, "The 108 kings, the 36 lords, the city lord of Anya City, Baijin, and the vice city lords all worked together, but they still failed to kill that cultivator from the outer world. Caretaker Hong, are you sure that the cultivator from the outer world is a god king and not a primordial realm expert?" "Sir Envoy, the foreign cultivator is indeed a divine king, and he has broken through to late divine king realm in our Anya city. All the citizens of our city can bear witness to this. It's impossible for him to be a primordial realm expert. Moreover, primordial realm experts from the outside world can't enter here, Manager Hong said carefully. He was extremely nervous inside. In Dark Knight City, he was at most a housekeeper who did odd jobs. However, the temple envoy standing in front of him was a big shot that even White Jean had to treat with respect, let alone him. He possesses such battle prowess as soon as he has broken through to late divine king realm. What are his origins? The envoy asked. Manager Hong shook his head, expressing that he did not know. The temple envoy frowned and muttered, "The information you know is too little. It seems we can only wait for Bai Jin to return before we can learn more. Now is a special time for our race. We absolutely cannot allow any accidents to happen. Since the cultivator from the outside world is so strong, he must be killed. Don't worry, Sir Envoy. The city lord has already led a group of experts in pursuit. The foreign cultivator definitely won't be able to escape. Perhaps he has already been slain by the city lord," said Manager Hong. Manager Hong said he was extremely nervous because he had personally witnessed the scene of Bai Jin's arm being chopped off and the divine beast blood essence being snatched away. He did not dare to tell the envoy about this. All he could do was pray inside, pray that Bai Jin could bring back the essence blood. The divine temple envoy waited for an entire day. After such a long time, Bai Jin still hadn't returned. This made the divine temple envoy have a bad feeling in his heart. At this moment, the news that Bai Jin and the other divine king experts had charged into the two-world mountain to hunt down a foreign cultivator gradually spread through Anya City. The face of the envoy immediately changed slightly when he heard the news. He leapt to his feet and was extremely stern. Bai Jin has actually entered the two-world mountain and hasn't returned after so long. It looks like they're probably in trouble. This is a matter of great importance. I need to report this to the Divine Hall immediately." The envoy left in a hurry. Jianchen ordered a few dishes in a luxurious restaurant in the center of the imperial capital of the Dark Star clan. He sat by the window and ate casually as he studied the imperial palace that hovered 1,000 meters in the air. The imperial palace of Anya City was extremely grand. It possessed the heavy pressure of a god artifact. With Jianchen's vision, he could tell with a single glance that the imperial palace hovering 1,000 meters in the air was actually a high-quality god artifact. It was a tough fortress that even Grand Primes would struggle to destroy. Jianchen was not surprised by the existence of a high-quality god artifact. After all, this was a powerful clan that had once given birth to a Grand Exalt. Even though they had declined, they still possessed some heritage. The only thing that Jianchen felt fortunate about was that the high-quality god artifact was not complete. It had been unimaginably damaged in the past, so it was still damaged. Less than 1/10 of its power remained. Moreover, he could clearly sense that the high-quality god artifact did not possess the artifact spirit. Chapter 2802. The Emperor of the Dark Star race is in the Imperial Palace. Although he's a 9th Heavenly Layer Infinite Prime, his presence is so powerful that he's no weaker than a 1st Heavenly Layer Chaotic Prime. Jianchen's gaze towards the Imperial Palace deepened. The high-quality god artifact Divine Hall was severely damaged. Coupled with the fact that the Dark Star Emperor did not purposefully conceal his presence, he could sense the Dark Star Emperor's presence as he sat in the restaurant. Of course, not everyone could sense it like Jianchen unless they possessed senses as great as Jianchen's. However, he used the mask to completely conceal himself. It was impossible to see through him unless one was a Grand Prime who stood at the apex. The Dark Star Emperor really is powerful. I'm still not his opponent right now. Jianchen became rather cautious. The only person he feared in the Dark Star race was the Dark Star Emperor. I can't sense Siyu's presence, but I'm certain that he's in the Imperial Palace. He's so important to the Dark Star race, so the Dark Star Emperor is personally watching over him. Jianchen felt rather regretful. However, he did not dare to scan the surroundings with the senses of his soul casually. If the Dark Star Emperor sensed him, it would be even more difficult to save Siyu. Afterwards, he looked at the 10 divine halls that also hovered in the air below the imperial palace. The 10 divine halls were extremely huge and varied in appearance. They were all low-quality god artifacts, and they were all heavily damaged. The artifact spirit had already vanished, so they did not have much power left. Without even asking, Jianshin knew that the 10 divine halls were the 10 overlords of the Dark Star race, second only to the Dark Star Emperor. The structure of power in the Dark Star race was very simple. The Dark Star Emperor stood at the very top, the supreme ruler of the Dark Star race. Below him were the 10 divine halls. The Dark Star Emperor did not care about anything, so all the matters of the Dark Star race were handled by the 10 divine halls. Each of the 10 divine halls was responsible for ruling the Dark Star race for 1,000 years. During this 1,000 years, it just happened to be the 7th divine hall's turn. Below the 10 divine halls were the 36 cities. What was left were various small towns and villages. Suddenly, Jianshin's eyes narrowed. He looked at one of the divine halls and saw a primordial realm expert from the Dark Star divine hall emerge from the floating square. His face was cold as he hurried towards the teleportation formation with several dozen divine kings. With a flash of light, they left. He's a second, heavenly layer infinite prime. He's in such a hurry to leave through a teleportation formation, so he should be going to Anya City. Jianshin thought. He looked at the divine hall. It was probably the current ruler of the Dark Star race, the 7th divine hall. The palace of the Dark Star race had Dark Star Emperor, so Jianshin did not dare to pry into it. However, he did not have to worry about the 10 sacred halls below. His consciousness quietly spread out and began to approach the 7th divine palace. He was very cautious. His soul had mutated after fusing with a sliver of the chaotic body, so it would be very difficult to discover him unless they were far more powerful than him. The 10 divine halls of the Dark Star race actually don't have any protective measures like restrictions or formations. Even the Imperial Palace doesn't seem to give off any pulses of energy from formations. It looks like they've been living peacefully here for far too long. But that's fine too. It'll save me quite a lot of trouble. Jianshan rejoiced inside, but it made sense when he thought about it carefully. The Dark Star race had a strict hierarchy, and there were no external threats. With the supreme status of the 10 divine halls and the Imperial Palace, who would be bold enough to use the senses of their soul to pry into them? In such a safe environment, the outcome would be the same whether they set up formations or not. Moreover, the Dark Star world was not a complete world. It was formed from a colossal beast, so there was a limit to how much energy could be produced. Not setting up formations would instead save some energy. The senses of Jianshin's soul entered the 7th divine palace easily. However, although there were no restrictions or formations, he did not dare to be careless. He ventured in carefully and was prepared to retreat at any time. There were several tens of thousands of people in the 7th divine palace. They ranged from gods to divine king. They all had their own duties, working in an orderly fashion. They were responsible for collecting and dealing with the various miscellaneous matters of the Dark Star race. Jianshin sensed the pulses of 3 infinite primes in the depths of the divine palace. The strongest was a 6th heavenly layer infinite prime, while the other 2 were 3rd and 4th heavenly layer infinite primes. Including the one who left before, the 7th divine hall already has 4 infinite primes. I wonder if that's all of them. If all 10 divine halls are like that, the Dark Star race probably has close to 50 primordial realm experts, or even more. Jianshin was rather surprised when he thought about it. With so many primordial realm experts gathered together, he needed to avoid them for now. This was because the primordial realm experts here were different from the Saints' world. Those who could break through to the primordial realm in such an environment were all people with great willpower, wisdom, and luck. They were prodigies among prodigies and they had remained at their current level of cultivation for an extremely long time. In the Saints' world, any primordial realm expert of the Darkstar race would be able to fight above their level of cultivation. That sixth heavenly layer Infinite Prime is the leader of the seventh Divine Hall. I have to treat him like a seventh heavenly layer Infinite Prime at the very least, Jianchen thought. He immediately became even more careful. As they ventured deeper, Jianchen could vaguely hear the conversation between the three Infinite Primes. Don't worry, Hall Master. Since Defu has personally gone to Dark Knight City, there definitely won't be any problems with the Essence Blood. Even if Baijin really does die in the Two-World Mountain, Defu will be able to bring the Essence Blood back with his strength, said the fourth heavenly layer Infinite Prime in the depths of the seventh Divine Hall. Jianchen's spiritual awareness could only be carefully hidden in the distance. He didn't dare to get too close, so naturally he couldn't see the appearance of the opponent. He could only vaguely catch some transmitted voices. It'll be fine if we can really bring back the Essence Blood, but if we can't, how am I supposed to answer to the Emperor? You know just how important the Essence Blood of a divine beast is. If something really happens, the leader of the seventh Divine Hall said. His voice was heavy and slightly worried. But immediately the seventh Divine Palace's master, seemed to have thought of something. His body suddenly exuded a cold, murderous intent, and his voice became indifferent. The incident in Dark Knight City seems to be caused by a cultivator from the outside world. These cultivators from the outside world have caused a lot of trouble for our clan this time. Send an order to 100 Saint City to execute all the cultivators from the outside world who are imprisoned in 100 Saint City. Leave no one alive. Execute all of them. Leader, T, isn't that a little inappropriate? After all, our clan still needs them to transport resources from the outside world, said the third heavenly layer Infinite Prime. Chapter 2803. Leader, the organizations in the 100 Saint City have great origins in the outside world. Most of the precious resources we need are in the hands of the large organizations in the outside world. We've already established our dominance by taking down the 100 Saint City, but if we kill the imprisoned people as well, we'll completely offend the large organizations in the outside world. If they don't provide us with resources because of this, it'll affect us quite a lot, said the fourth heavenly layer Infinite Prime from the Darkstar clan. He was called Lai, and he was a vice leader of the seventh Divine Hall. The third heavenly layer Infinite Prime, Kaiser, spoke up as well. And Lai is right. After all, the existence of the cultivators from the outside world has been personally approved by the Emperor. Leader, do you think we should? Enough. However, before Kaiser could finish speaking, he was interrupted by the leader of the seventh hall. He said impatiently, I've already made up my mind. There's no need for you to say anything more. Immediately pass the order to the people guarding the 100 Saints City to execute all the cultivators from the outside world locked up in the city. Leave none alive. The two vice hall masters, Anlai and Kaiser, glanced at each other helplessly. The seventh hall's hall master's prejudice against the cultivators of the outer world was too deep. This time he wanted to take advantage of the great sacrifice to kill all the outer world cultivators in 100 Holy City. The two of them even suspected that if it were not for the fact that the existence of the cultivators from the outside world had been personally approved by the Emperor, the Seven Hall probably would not have just targeted the cultivators of the 100 Saint City. Instead, all the cultivators from the outside world would have faced a disaster. Oh, right. Has there been any news about Kuan Tian recently? The leader of the Seventh Hall suddenly asked. However, his gaze sharpened slightly when he mentioned Kuan Tian's name. The Fifth Hall leader hasn't appeared since he entered the land of soul destruction 3 years ago. He must still be cultivating in seclusion there, searching for a breakthrough, said Kaiser. The Seventh Hall master immediately sneered when he heard that. He said, after the primordial realm, every single step forward for us, Darkstar clansmen, is fraught with difficulties. If we want to break through, we'll have to go through thousands of tribulations. It's even more difficult than reaching the heavens, let alone breaking through from the fifth heavenly layer to the sixth heavenly layer. How can it be so easy for Kuan Tian to break through to the sixth heavenly layer and contend against me? Moreover, he entered the land of soul destruction. Legend has it that the land of soul destruction is a special region formed by the brain of a star beast after it died. It is filled with an incomparably chaotic and ruthless will. This chaotic will can cause extremely serious damage to one's soul. Once one is unable to withstand it, the damage to one's soul can only be considered light. However, if one's mind is affected and becomes crazy, it will be very serious. Moreover, the dangers of the land of soul destruction are not just the chaotic will. What's even more dangerous are the undying wills left behind by some star beasts after they died. Once we're affected by the undying wills, even primordial realm experts like us will face the danger of dying if we're careless. Kuan Tian has been gone for 3 years. In our clan, apart from the great emperor, no one has ever stayed in the soul-extinguishing land for such a long time. Kuan Tian, it looks like you're really willing to risk everything in order to break through to the sixth heavenly layer of infinite prime. The leader of the seventh hall sneered as he sneered. The senses of Genshin's soul remained hidden in the seventh divine hall for a while. Even after their conversation ended, he did not hear anything about Siyu. The senses of his soul silently withdrew from the seventh divine hall. Although he already knew that the lives of the cultivators imprisoned in the 100 Saint City were in danger, Jin Hong's group was about to leave the Two-World Mountain as well. However, the mention of the land of soul destruction from the seventh divine hall attracted Genshin's attention. The Kuan Tian that the leader of the seventh hall speaks of should be the leader of the fifth divine hall. The leader of the fifth divine hall has entered the land of soul destruction. The land of soul destruction is formed from the brains of star beasts after they died. It's filled with the undying will of star beasts. It can threaten primordial realm experts. The star beast should be the star beast that transformed the world of the dark star world. As he thought about it, Genshin's eyes gradually lit up. If he wanted to save Siyu, he would definitely have to face the dark star race head-on. Conflict was unavoidable. If the dark star race lost a few primordial realm experts before the battle erupted, he would be able to relieve some of the pressure. The land of soul destruction. A map immediately appeared in Genshin's head. The map clearly depicted the regions of the Two-World Mountain and the Dark Star World. The region of the Two-World Mountain was a blur. It was completely blank without any detailed descriptions. However, the region of the Dark Star World was much clearer. The 36 main cities and the various towns and villages of various sizes were all marked out. Genshin had discovered this detailed map of the entire Dark Star World in the space ring of the city, Lord of Dark Knight City, by Jean. Although he did not take anything from the space ring, he had memorized the map. He found the land of soul destruction very soon on the map. Without any hesitation, he immediately left the royal capital of the Dark Star race. The royal capital was watched over by the Dark Star Emperor. Not only would he be restricted if he continued to stay here, but he would not be able to benefit much either. He would not be able to learn anything useful. If that was the case, it would be better for him to go to the land of soul destruction and find the fifth hall master, who was in seclusion. At the very least, he would be able to do whatever he wanted there. He might even be able to learn some precise information about Siyu from the fifth hall master. The land of soul destruction was a place of danger for the Dark Star race. Very few people would go there. Only a few Dark Star clansmen who were in a hurry to break through would take the risk and go there in an attempt to benefit from the will of the dead star beasts. However, most of these people would end up dying there forever. Even if some of them managed to make it out alive, their souls would be damaged and their minds would be in a mess. They would suffer from sequelae that would be difficult to recover from. There were very few people who could truly benefit from the land of soul destruction. It could be said that they would only see one in 1,000 years. Several hours later, Jianqin arrived outside the land of soul destruction. With a single glance, the land of soul destruction seemed like a valley surrounded by mountains. The land of soul destruction was surrounded by huge mountains that reached into the clouds. They formed a huge circle that surrounded the land of soul destruction. Only the passageway, which was less than 3,000 meters wide, was the only entrance to the land of soul destruction. Inside the soul-extinguishing land, there were gusts of cold wind. The cold wind blew against the mountain rocks, emitting strange, whistling sounds. Coupled with the rolling dark clouds in the low sky, it looked like a group of demons were dancing in a frenzy. What a chaotic will! Jianqin frowned as he stood outside the desolate land of soul destruction. He became extremely stern. Chapter 2804. At the entrance of the land of destruction, Jianqin gave off the presence of the Dark Star clan as he hovered 1,000 meters in the air. He had disguised his strength as a late divine king. He hovered 1,000 meters in the air and carefully observed the land of destruction before flying into the depths of the land of destruction through the wide entrance. He did not move quickly, neither too quickly nor too slowly. He remained on high alert the entire time. With his strength, he could move about freely among the Dark Star clan. Even if he came across the greatest expert of the Dark Star clan, the Dark Star Emperor, he was confident he could retreat safely. However, the land of soul destruction was a special place formed from the brain of an astral beast after its death, after all. Anything left behind by a terrifying beast that was on par with 9th heavenly layer grand primes would pose a fatal threat to infinite primes after its death. Jianqin was confident, but he did not dare to be careless in the land of destruction. As he rapidly approached the land of destruction, the chilling winds that wreaked havoc gradually blew past Jianqin as well. It immediately made Jianqin shiver and his heart turn cold. The coldness directly reached his soul. The souls of fighters were unable to sense coldness at all, but at this moment, Jianqin's soul truly felt coldness. The chilling winds could directly affect the souls of fighters. Even primordial realm experts were no exception. The chilling winds and the dark clouds in the surroundings are actually a form of soul energy, or in other words, the lingering will and will of an astral beast after its death. Jianqin became more and more cautious. He felt like the land of destruction was even more dangerous than directly facing the Dark Star Emperor, who was no weaker than a chaotic prime. Roar! Finally, Jianqin flew into the land of destruction. He had truly entered the huge valley. However, a great beast's roar directly rang out in Jianqin's soul without warning. The beast's roar was earth-shaking and domineering. It possessed great power that could shake up space. It was like a bolt of lightning, directly exploding in Jianqin's head with boundless might. Jianqin's hovering body immediately shook. His expression changed rapidly, and he immediately closed his eyes. He began to condense the power of his soul as hard as he could to guard his mind. With the beast's roar, an astral beast, even larger than a planet, appeared in Jianqin's head. It was extremely blurry, like a ball of mist. It was impossible to make out its exact appearance, but the tremendous pressure it gave off caused Jianqin's soul to shake constantly. This is something formed from the scattered soul energy of an astral beast after its death. Jianqin could be said to have seen a lot now, so he recognized the composition of the beast with a single glance. He was shocked. He was a primordial realm expert, after all, so he could still endure a soul attack like that. However, if it were a divine king, even if they were a peak divine king, they would have been obliterated by the beast's roar. He had just entered the land of destruction, yet he had already endured such a powerful attack. Jianqin could not help but re-evaluate the dangers of the land of destruction. However, before Jianqin could react too much, the colossal beast in his head suddenly moved. An extremely huge claw slammed towards Jianqin's head with supreme might that could suppress space. Although the true power of the claw was nowhere close to the level of suppressing outer space, Jianqin could truly sense the supreme might when the claw struck down. This was the might that the astral beast possessed when it was still alive. Even though it was dead now, some of this might could still be transmitted through the energy of the soul. This was a naked attack on the soul, an impact of the will. Jianqin could only guard his mind and condense his soul so that he could endure it in the toughest state possible. This scene was like a small sapling growing in the wind. When faced with the wind, it was completely powerless. The only thing it could do was to let its roots dig deep into the soil to stabilize itself and let the wind blow past it. Jianqin's soul suffered a heavy impact when the astral beast's attack landed. Even with his soul that had already mutated and become extraordinary, he still felt piercing pain before becoming dizzy. His consciousness blurred for a moment when his soul was impacted. That moment was when his senses of the outside world were at their lowest. Fortunately, he was not fighting with anyone at that moment, or the consequences would have been unthinkable. Jianqin became vigilant. He had just entered the soul-destroying land, yet he had already suffered such a heavy attack on his soul. The dangers of the soul-destroying land had completely exceeded his expectations. This was because this was equivalent to an attack on the soul. Before such an attack, his chaotic body was completely useless. An attack like this shouldn't last for too long. Otherwise, it would have been impossible for the Hall Master of the Fifth Hall, Kuan Tian, to remain in there for 3 years. Let alone 3 years, even half a year would have been impossible, Jianqin thought. However, with that thought in mind, Jianqin lasted an hour. During that hour, the attacks on his soul did not weaken at all. Instead, they gradually strengthened. The astral beasts that appeared in his head took various forms to attack him. Sometimes they were huge beasts, sometimes there were various figures. There were even some dangerous regions in outer space. These figures were all remnants of the astral beasts' memories after their deaths. The blurry, dangerous regions in outer space were all dangerous enough to make Jianqin's heart palpitate. In just an hour, I've already used up 50% of the power of my soul. How did the Hall Master of the Fifth Hall, Kuan Tian, stay in an environment like this for 3 years? Something's wrong! Jianqin endured the attacks from the soul-destroying land with great difficulty as he began to study his surroundings. Very soon he found an inkling. He discovered that the higher he was from the ground, the denser the astral beasts' consciousnesses and consciousnesses would be. On the other hand, the consciousnesses and consciousnesses of the astral beasts would be weaker. Jianqin immediately lowered his altitude, going from 1,000 meters to 500 meters. He immediately saw results. The attacks on his soul weakened drastically, and he immediately became much more relaxed. I see. Jianqin came to a realization. He cursed himself for being foolish and immediately landed on the ground. He found a safe place and began to recover the power of his soul. He could encounter the Hall Master of the Fifth Hall, Kuan Tian, at any time in the soul-destroying land. He needed to be in peak condition at all times. As Jianqin recovered the power of his soul, a figure sat on a large rock that was as smooth as a mirror several million kilometers away. He was a middle-aged man. His face was resolute and cold, and he gave off the presence of a primordial realm expert. He was the Hall Master of the Fifth Hall, Kuan Tian. However, Kuan Tian's face was rather twisted at this moment. The presence of a primordial realm expert pulsed extremely unsteadily, sometimes strong and sometimes weak, sometimes brutal and sometimes violent. Arg! Suddenly, Kuan Tian, who was sitting cross-legged, stood up abruptly. His eyes opened, and a faint blood-red color appeared in his eyes. He let out a long howl toward the sky, and the powerful sound waves reverberated between the mountains and rocks. It caused the dark clouds formed by the soul power of the star beast to churn violently in the sky after its death. Chapter 2805. The Fifth Hall Master, Kuan Tian, stayed in the land of destruction for 3 years. He was in a hurry to break through, so he took a risk. He wanted to forcefully fuse with a strand of the astral beast soul energy, but as a result, his mind became heavily affected. He clashed with the astral beast soul energy, becoming insane. Moreover, his power was unstable. The power of a fifth heavenly layer infinite prime pulsed violently from him like boiling water. Although the power belonged to a fifth heavenly layer infinite prime, it was even more powerful than most fifth heavenly layer infinite primes in the saint's world. This was because the power was just too pure. It was like highly concentrated essence, without any impurities. To refine one's power to such a level would require an extremely long period of arduous cultivation. It would probably take thousands of years. Arg! Kuin Tian constantly bellowed out. He would smash the ground with his hands at times and roll around on the ground while clutching his head tightly at other times. He seemed to be in great pain. After enduring the pain for 6 hours, he seemed to have finally reached his limit. He bellowed out at the sky, and his energy seemed to have completely lost control. The violent power that belonged to a fifth heavenly layer infinite prime, or even some sixth heavenly layer infinite primes, suddenly erupted from his body. It wreaked havoc in the land of destruction as a storm. The violent energy shook up the land of destruction, immediately turning it into a surging ocean. Huge waves surged as the surroundings shook. Even the remnant consciousnesses of the astral beast that filled the land of destruction became abnormally active. After venting his anger, the fifth hall master gradually calmed down from his initial manic state. The crazed look in his eyes gradually faded, and the energy ripples on his body also slowly calmed down. Afterwards, his body swayed before collapsing on the ground. He seemed to have fainted. Of course, he did not die. Not only did his life aura not weaken, it even showed signs of strengthening. Even his aura was gradually becoming stronger. Near the entrance of the soul-wiping grounds, Jianqin suddenly opened his eyes as he recovered the power of his soul. He seemed to sense something, and his indifferent gaze became extremely sharp at that moment. He shone brightly, directly piercing through the layers of space and looking into the depths of the soul-wiping grounds. There's a primordial realm aura erupting up ahead. It's around the strength of a fifth heavenly layer infinite prime. It must be the leader of the fifth hall, Kuin Tian, Jianqin thought. This soul-extinguishing land was filled with the obsessions of star beasts. Once he released his divine sense, it would clash with the star beast's obsessions. Therefore, it was difficult for his divine sense to spread out in this soul-extinguishing land. At the same time, he was affected by the remnant left behind by the fallen astral beast. His perception was also greatly reduced. Without these abilities, searching for a person in the soul-wiping grounds was like searching for a needle in a haystack. Just as he was worrying about not being able to find the leader of the fifth hall, he had actually caused such a great disturbance, allowing Jianqin to locate him immediately. Since I know where he is, finding him will be much easier. There's no hurry. Leader of the fifth hall, once my soul recovers, you will die. Heavy killing intent flashed through Jianqin's eyes. The soul-wiping grounds were perfect for killing people. The special environment here was equivalent to a natural barrier. It could greatly suppress the pulses from erupting with primordial realm experts. There was no need to worry about the disturbance from fighting here reaching the royal capital of the Dark Star race. Perhaps I should find a way to draw out the primordial realm experts of the Dark Star race and then kill them one by one. I've already fallen out with the Dark Star race anyway, so conflict is unavoidable. If a few more of their primordial realm experts die, it'll instead reduce the pressure on me to save Siyu, Jianqin thought. Suddenly, a figure flashed through his head. It was the primordial realm expert who had left the 7th Divine Hall for Dark Night City, Defu. If he killed him in Two World Mountain, would he be able to push Defu's death onto the primordial realm, life-devouring beasts in Two World Mountain? As he thought of that, Jianqin recovered the power of his soul even faster. In order to save time, he even took out a few heavenly resources that specialized in recovering the power of the soul from his space ring and ingested them. Of course, none of these heavenly resources had reached the God tier, so they were not particularly effective to primordial realm experts. However, they were better than nothing, so they could make him recover slightly faster. Over half a day later, Genshin's soul had recovered to 90% of its peak condition. Before he could fully recover, he directly shot off in the direction of Kuentian. Genshin maintained a low altitude of 10 meters above the ground. The laws of space pulsed around him, so he moved extremely quickly, crossing 1,000 kilometers in a single instance. Naturally, this speed was rather slow for him who had grasped the laws of space. However, this was the soul-wiping grounds. It was a special place. The obsession of the astral beasts interfered with everything, and danger was hidden everywhere. As a result, he needed to advance carefully. Several million kilometers away, Kuentian woke up slowly. He opened his eyes and looked at the gloomy sky. A sliver of doubt appeared in his eyes. The sky was both familiar and unfamiliar to him. What is this place? Kuentian slowly sat up. His eyes looked around as he looked around. He became more and more confused. He suddenly had no idea where he was, but he just happened to find this place slightly familiar. However, soon afterwards, Kuentian suddenly quivered. He ravished with joy as he cried out, "I've broken through! I've actually broken through! I, Kuentian, have finally broken free from the restraints of the 5th heavenly layer! I've officially reached the 6th heavenly layer!" Ha 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 ha! Kuentian laughed aloud at the sky as he danced around excitedly. He was extremely emotional. However, he seemed to realize something soon afterwards. He quickly calmed down and became confused. Who's Kuentian? Why did I call myself Kuentian? Am I called Kuentian? But why can't I remember? Who am I? What's my name? Who am I? Who am I? Why am I here? Where is this place? I think I know where this place is, but why can't I remember? Kuentian tossed his joy from breaking through to the 6th heavenly layer to the back of his head in the blink of an eye. He sat on the ground rather dejectedly as he hammered his head heavily in thought. Chapter 2806. At this moment, Genshin arrived as well. He used the mask to disguise himself as a Darkstar clansman. A black mask appeared on his face as well. It was made from some unknown material that could block the senses of the soul. He did not hide himself. Stepping on the ground, he made his way towards the half-kneeling Kuentian step by step. He stared at Kuentian's current situation with his exposed eyes as they flickered with a strange light. Kuentian's condition is off. He seems to have lost a portion of his memories. Genshin was surprised. He was greatly surprised. Naturally, he could tell that Kuentian had broken through, formally becoming a 6th heavenly layer infinite prime. He did not care too much about this. Kuentian had sensed Genshin's existence long ago. He was a clansman, but he was just too weak. He was only at the peak of the Divine King, so he did not take him seriously. With his back towards Genshin, he did not take Genshin seriously at all. Instead, he frowned and thought. He discovered that he had forgotten many things. Apart from knowing that he had always been working hard to break through from the 5th heavenly layer to the 6th heavenly layer, he could not remember anything else, including his own identity and name. He tried his best to remember some things, but no matter how hard he tried, he could not remember anything apart from a hazy and unfamiliar sense of familiarity towards the scenery of this place. Even the name Kuentian that he had just mentioned was both familiar and unfamiliar to him. Genshin stood 10 meters away from Kuentian. He stared at Kuentian, who completely ignored him, and the light in his eyes flickered. After a moment of thought, he said with a hoarse voice, "Kuentian, you really are injured. It looks like the leader was right. You spent 3 years in the land of soul destruction, so it's impossible for you to remain unscathed." Kuentian froze. Originally, he did not take Genshin seriously because Genshin's presence was only at the peak of the Divine King. He was as insignificant as an ant to any 6th heavenly layer infinite prime. It was only when Genshin called out the name Kuentian that he finally began to carefully examine the tribesman beside him, who was as weak as an ant in his eyes. The half-kneeling Kuan-Tian slowly straightened his body. He turned around and stared at the black-masked Genshin with a pair of cold eyes. He frowned and said, "You know this hall master?" As soon as the words left his mouth, Kuan-Tian's face was once again filled with doubt and confusion. He muttered in his heart, "This hall master? Why would I call myself that?" Kuan-Tian racked his brains, but after a long time he still had no clue. He had already forgotten everything. Many of his actions and words were instinctive. He had referred to himself as this hall master for many years. Even though he had forgotten everything now, he still retained many of his instinctive reactions, words, actions, and bearing. Genshin was speechless. He was observant, so he took in all of Kuan-Tian's reactions and expressions. He smiled gently. "Of course I know him. He's the hall master of the 5th of the 10 great halls of the Dark Star race, Kuan-Tian." Genshin paused for a moment before continuing. "The hall master's foresight really is amazing. He's determined that you've been in the soul-destroying land for 3 years, so something must have gone wrong with your cultivation. He's even determined that you've died there. Looking at it now, although you haven't died, your soul has been extremely heavily injured. You've already lost your memories. You don't even remember who you are." As he said that, Genshin felt some pity. Originally, he wanted to learn some information about Siyu from Kuan-Tian, but looking at Kuan-Tian's current state, he could not even remember himself, let alone learn any information. The hall master of the 5th hall, Kuan-Tian. The hall master of the 5th hall, Kuan-Tian. After hearing Genshin's words, Kuan-Tian fell into deep thought. He muttered to himself. Although he could not remember, he had a very strong sense of familiarity with the 5th hall. Suddenly, Kuan-Tian looked at Genshin. His eyes shone with a divine light. "Who are you?" As he spoke, his eyes gradually turned sharp. His expression was dignified, and he had an inviolable aura. He felt a killing intent. It was so eerie that it made him feel alarmed. The ant in front of him, who was only at the late stage of the Divine King, did not hide it. "You only need to know that I'm here to kill you. You don't need to know anything else." Since Kuan-Tian had already lost his memories, Genshin naturally did not want to waste any more words on him. He struck out decisively as soon as he finished speaking. His aura was still at the peak of the Divine King realm. However, when he attacked, his aura shook the heavens and earth. His body instantly shone with dazzling light. Powerful sword light enveloped him. He looked like a small sun, dazzling and dazzling. Genshin did not use anything. Moreover, he needed to use his full strength against Kuan-Tian, who had become a 6th heavenly layer infinite prime. With his strength, there was no supreme quality saint artifact or half-god artifact that could endure his attacks. He reached out, and a resplendent streak of light immediately condensed. As the streak of light pulsed, it gave off a powerful pulse that could even surprise primordial realm experts. Just the streak of light that he had casually condensed was far more powerful than supreme quality saint artifacts. Swish! The streak of light tore through the air. It moved extremely quickly, as if it had surpassed the limits of time and space. It appeared before Kuan-Tian in a single instance, directly targeting Kuan-Tian's soul. "You're not the Divine King. You're a primordial realm expert," Kuan-Tian cried out. His face suddenly changed. The strength that the primordial realm expert, who had disguised himself as the Divine King, had erupted with shocked him. Not only was the incoming streak of sword chi shockingly fast, but the power it contained was so great that it made him shiver. In that critical moment, Kuan-Tian's body shook gently, and he immediately became slightly more illusionary. The sword chi condensed in Genshin's hand directly stabbed into Kuan-Tian's forehead. The resplendent streak of light passed through his body, piercing his head. However, Genshin's face did not change at all. His eyes remained extremely cold, filled with heavy killing intent. With a thought, chaotic force immediately filled his body, completely unleashing the defenses of the chaotic body. Boom! It was also at this moment that Kun Tian's body suddenly exploded. The tremendous energy formed a terrifying storm of destruction that engulfed Jianqin. The power of the storm of energy was not something that a sixth heavenly layer infinite prime could unleash. It was completely on par with the full-powered strike of a peak sixth heavenly layer infinite prime. This was because the energy was just too pure. It had been highly compressed without any impurities. No primordial realm expert in the saints' world could refine their energy to such a level. Following the explosion of Kun Tian's body, the entire soul extermination land was no longer peaceful. In the sky, the dense dark clouds were surging violently. It was as if a demon was constantly changing its shape, baring its fangs and brandishing its claws. Bone-chilling winds whistled sharply, like the howls of ghosts or the roars of huge beasts. Jianqin shone resplendently within the storm of energy from Kun Tian's explosion. He protected himself with light as he stood as still as a mountain. He suddenly slashed out with the sword qi he had condensed in his hand. As the sword slashed down, it seemed to split the world apart. The entire region of space was slashed in half, and the devastating storm of energy passed by him without touching him at all. Chapter 2807. Jianqin could tell that it was not Kun Tian's original body that had self-destructed. Instead, it was a body that Kun Tian had condensed from powerful energy using a secret technique. It was similar to a clone. However, the clone was extraordinary. Its self-destruction was so powerful that it was equivalent to the full-powered strike of a fifth heavenly layer infinite prime. As soon as the clone was formed, Kun Tian's original body silently hid in the space 3,000 meters away. He concealed his presence and completely concealed himself. First, he used the self-destruction of the clone to confuse his opponent or even heavily injure his opponent. Then, his original body that hid in the darkness could deliver a fatal strike at any time when the opportunity presented itself. It had to be mentioned that this was a very efficient method of killing enemies. If it were a fifth heavenly layer infinite prime from the saint's world, it really would be possible for them to be slain by Kun Tian in a single strike. Even sixth heavenly layer infinite primes who are on par with Kun Tian would die if they were careless. However, he just happened to encounter Jianqin. Before Jianqin, who controlled the laws of space, Kun Tian, who did not know the laws of space, was just like showing off in front of an expert. Bang! With a heavy rumble, space rippled violently like water. Jianqin stabbed out with his sword and forced Kun Tian out. Kun Tian was stern. He wielded a sword that was 3 fingers wide. The sword shone with dazzling light, giving off powerful pulses of energy. However, he was knocked back by Jianqin's strike. Although Jianqin did not possess the 9-star sword of heavenly ways and his battle prowess had been reduced, he was still more powerful than Kun Tian, who had just broken through to the 6th heavenly layer. Even though Kun Tian was more powerful than many 6th heavenly layer infinite primes in the saint's world, he still lost the upper hand against Jianqin. Who are you? Since when did our Dark Star race have an expert like you? Kun Tian growled. However, as soon as he said that, he became lost. He could no longer remember which experts the Dark Star race possessed. Jianqin knew that Kun Tian had lost his memory and couldn't remember many things. However, he would often subconsciously talk about things that happened before he lost his memory. Because some memories were too deep, it was like a brand that was deeply engraved in the depths of one's soul. Even if one lost their memories on the surface, they would still remember them subconsciously. Kun Tian's amnesia won't last for too long. He only needs an opportunity to awaken him slightly, and he should remember everything that happened before. Jianqin thought in his heart. His gaze swept over the long sword in Kun Tian's hand, and his heart suddenly stirred. Kun Tian's sword was a low-grade divine artifact, an intact one at that. From the sword Tao laws contained within the sword, Kun Tian's Tao was also the sword Tao. Immediately, the killing intent in Jianqin's heart erupted like a volcano. At this moment, his killing intent towards Kuan Tian had reached an unprecedented level. "Today, I will definitely kill you." Jianshin's heart was as firm as steel. He said nothing. His gaze was as cold as ice as he condensed sword qi to attack Kuan Tian again. The sword in Kuan Tian's hand immediately erupted with the might of a divine artifact. He stabbed it towards Jianshin as well. The sword shone with a blinding light, tearing a thin crack in space. The tough ground beneath his feet became covered in sword slashes as well. Jianshin sneered. He controlled space and interfered with the distance between the two of them. Kuan Tian's sword immediately slowed down, while Jianshin's sword qi suddenly sped up. Kuan Tian's eyes suddenly narrowed, but he did not become flustered at all. A low-grade divine artifact armor instantly covered his body. Jianshin's sword qi struck Kuan Tian's armor, but it failed to penetrate it. It only sent Kuan Tian flying. Jianshin could not help but frown when he saw this. Kuan Tian was not weak. He possessed the battle prowess of a 6th heavenly layer infinite prime. Now that he had 2 god artifacts, both his attack and defense had increased. He was basically like a tiger that had grown wings. Killing him in this state would take quite a lot of effort. Of course, Kuan Tian alone wasn't enough to give him that much pressure. The key was that he had seen the strength of the 10 temple masters from Kuan Tian. If all 10 temple masters had divine artifacts, it wouldn't be good news for him. Dark Star Emperor art heaven-splitting. At this moment, Kuan Tian suddenly bellowed out. Energy surged out from his body as the might of a god-tier battle skill permeated the surroundings. He swung his sword towards Jianshin from afar. The pressure in the depths of the soul-destroying land was tremendous. As he swung his sword, it possessed the power to destroy the world. It was as if the entire sky had been cleaved in half. An invisible binding force appeared. Jianshin felt his body sink. Not only was his movement restricted, but his presence had been completely locked onto as well. Even if he used the laws of space to leave this place, he would not be able to escape from the attack of a god-tier battle skill. Jianshin's expression did not change. He remained composed and composed, but his eyes became scorching white at that moment. It was as if endless sword qi was hidden in his eyes. He used the will of the ultimate way of the sword, and the power of the laws of the sword immediately increased. It became even more powerful. However, his expression became rather strange at this moment. This was because when he used the will of the ultimate way of the sword, he could vaguely sense where the might of the god-tier battle skill resided. A god-tier battle skill possessed the might of the world. This was practically the mark of any god-tier battle skill. Jianshin had already sensed it many times. However, at this very moment, when he used the ultimate way of the sword, the feeling he felt was completely different from before. His perception of the world was much clearer and more accurate. In the past, he had viewed the might of the world as a great way of the world and the laws of the world. He was not the only one. Practically all cultivators acknowledged this. However, at this very moment, he had overturned his previous understanding of the might of the world. Rather than calling the might of the world and the laws of the world, it would be more accurate to call it a certain kind of will, a will that originated from the world. It was as if using a god-tier battle skill could obtain the support of the will of the world. The will of the world? The world also has a will. Or could it be that this is only because the formation of the Dark Star realm is special that I have such a misconception? At this very moment, Jianshin was at a loss. However, this was the first time he had used the ultimate way of the sword to directly face a god-tier battle skill. Thus, he could not be certain that it was the same in the outside world. Furthermore, having reached his level of cultivation, his understanding of the world was much greater than before. He clearly knew that in order to have a will, one must have a thought. Will could also be said to be a kind of thought. The god-tier battle skill's speed was extremely fast. In a flash, Jianqin did not have the time to think too much. When he sensed the will, he immediately used the ultimate way of the sword to form an invisible long sword and ruthlessly stabbed forward. Chapter 2808. Naturally, an attack like that posed no threat to Jianqin. Let alone a threat, it was not even enough for Jianqin to take it seriously. He casually sent out a strand of sword qi to nullify Kuan Tian's attack. Kuan Tian's god-tier battle skill did not even cause a ripple. Kuan Tian was stunned. He stared at this scene in disbelief as disbelief filled his face. Although he couldn't remember a lot of things, and it was completely an instinctive reaction, he wasn't stupid. He could naturally feel how shocking the power of the move he used was. How could such a powerful divine battle skill only have so little power? Why is it like this? It's impossible for my attack to be so weak. Why do I feel powerless towards the end? Kuan Tian murmured to himself. He was perplexed, unable to understand what was going on no matter how hard he racked his brains. If the person before him had done something to it, he should have sensed it at the very least. However, he clearly sensed nothing. Jianqin paused for a while as well. The effects of the Supreme Will made him extremely excited. He was basically overjoyed because he discovered that destroying Kuan Tian's god-tier battle skill with the Supreme Will did not cause him too great of a loss. He had only used up some of the power of his soul at most. This loss of power was negligible to him. I really never thought that behind a god-tier battle skill, there would actually be a connection with the will of the world, and the connection would actually be so weak. The sword condensed from my Supreme Will can sever the connection easily. However, I wonder if this is only effective against Kuan Tian's god-tier battle skill, or if it's effective against all god-tier battle skills. If it can suppress all god-tier battle skills like this, I won't have to fear the god-tier battle skills of the Darkstar race at all when I fight against them in the future. However, the Darkstar world is different from the Saints' world. One is a complete major world created by the world, while the other is a miniature world condensed from star beasts. Just because my Supreme Will can destroy a god-tier battle skill in the Darkstar world doesn't mean it's the same in the Saints' world. But it's enough as long as it's useful in the Darkstar world. Jianqin thought quickly. He had already begun thinking about how to find other primordial realm experts to test it out. Although it was effective on one divine tier battle skill, it didn't mean that it would be effective on all divine tier battle skills. After all, there were all kinds of divine tier battle skills, and it still needed to be verified. You're the one behind this. Kuan Tian stared at Jianqin in shock and asked in bewilderment. Fortunately, he did not remember all of the memories. Otherwise, his heart would be in turmoil at this moment. This was because, in the knowledge of almost all cultivators, it was impossible for a divine tier battle skill to have such a change. A moment ago, it was still earth-shattering, and the might of heaven and earth was suppressing the void. However, in the next moment, all the divine might had disappeared completely and had become the most ordinary attack. Kuan Tian clearly didn't believe it. The energy in his body surged as he began to use his divine battle skill again. Dark Star Emperor technique, Void Annihilation. Jianqin also wanted to verify whether his Supreme Will had any restrictions on divine tier battle skills. As a result, he was naturally happy to see Kuan Tian use his divine tier battle skill a second time. Kuan Tian was a 6th heavenly layer infinite prime, so he naturally used his divine tier battle skill extremely quickly. He basically completed it with a raise of his hand. Immediately, a pressure filled the surroundings as a second divine tier battle skill was formed. It crushed towards Jianqin with a devastating presence. This time, the power of the divine battle skill was even stronger than the previous one. A huge millstone appeared in the void, emitting a strong pressure. Everywhere it passed, the void was crushed into pieces, turning into a piece of chaos. Jianqin's eyes were extremely bright. He had already become restless. With a sliver of anticipation and urgency, his Supreme Will turned into an invisible sword once again and slashed out eagerly. The millstone from the divine tier battle skill fell extremely quickly, but Genshin Supreme was even faster. Following a vague feeling, the sword from the Supreme will sever the connection between the divine tier battle skill and the world once again. Immediately, the divine tier battle skill that was destructive and pressuring earlier immediately deflated, like a deflated balloon. All of its might vanished, and the divine tier battle skill was reduced to the most ordinary of energy attacks in an instant. Impossible, this is impossible. This time, Kuan Tian was completely dumbfounded. He could understand the failure of the divine tier battle skill the first time as a result of some mistake, but he was clearly much more cautious when he used his divine tier battle skill a second time. He had already used his full strength, yet he still ended up in the same state as before. No matter how hard he thought about it, he still failed to understand what had happened. This was because he had not sensed Genshin move at all. The divine tier battle skill he had used had collapsed just like that for some reason. It was not just the divine tier battle skill that had collapsed. His mind had collapsed as well. After all, using a god tier battle skill consumed quite a lot of energy. Even 6th Heavenly Layer Infinite Primes would not be able to ignore the exhaustion after failing twice in a row. However, Genshin was overjoyed. He had actually succeeded a second time. After succeeding twice in a row, he became slightly convinced that his Supreme was effective against divine tier battle skills. Afterwards, he did not waste any more time. He immediately attacked Kuan Tian. Without the divine tier battle skill, the threat that Kuan Tian posed to Genshin decreased once again. However, even with that being the case, his battle prowess was still extremely great. He relied on the 2 god artifacts to engage in an extremely intense battle with Genshin in the soul-destroying land. Genshin was in no hurry to kill Kuan Tian. Instead, he carefully observed Kuan Tian's battle style and some of his specialties during the battle. However, through the battle, he discovered that his Supreme was only effective against divine tier battle skills. It would be useless against the secret techniques of the Darkstar clan. Very soon, Genshin and Kuan Tian had already fought for 4 hours. The battlefield spanned several tens of thousand kilometers. An entire soul-destroying land surged at their battle. The lingering consciousnesses of the dead star beasts wreaked havoc in the surroundings, surging into their minds from time to time and interfering with their souls. Roar! Suddenly, Genshin's body stiffened. A deafening roar rang out in his head, shaking his soul to the point where it shook like a candle in the wind. He was attacked by the lingering consciousnesses of the star beasts again, and this time it was much more powerful than before. It caused his consciousness to blur for a moment. At the same time, a great sense of danger appeared. Genshin immediately retreated without any hesitation. The laws of space pulsed around him, and he retreated 100 meters in a single instance as if he had teleported. Basically, the moment Genshin vanished, a resplendent streak of light slashed over. It basically brushed past his forehead, allowing him to dodge it by a hair's breadth. Even though Genshin had successfully dodged it, the sharp sword chi still made him feel like he was being stabbed by needles. The mask on his face shattered under the sword chi, revealing his face. A smear of confusion appeared in Kuan Tian's eyes when he saw the familiar, yet extremely unfamiliar face. However, he subconsciously cried out, "Defu, it's actually you!" Impossible, this is impossible. You're clearly only a 2nd Heavenly Layer Infinite Prime. So how have you suddenly become so powerful? Have you been hiding your strength all these years? Genshin's current appearance was not his true appearance. Instead, it was the 2nd Heavenly Layer Infinite Prime he had seen in the royal capital, the one who had traveled to Dark Knight City through a teleportation formation. The Defu in Kuan Tian's eyes smiled strangely. He said mysteriously, "Leader, you don't need to know that much." With that, Genshin stabbed out with the sword chi in his hand towards Kuan Tian. When he stabbed out, the sword chi in his hand and a small portion of his arm vanished. as if they had completely fused with space. Shadowless, fatal sword. Kuan Tian's body suddenly shook violently, and his face instantly turned pale. His eyes were wide open, filled with disbelief, confusion, and doubt. He opened his mouth and spat out a mouthful of blood, mixed with countless pieces of his internal organs. He only felt an extremely powerful strand of sword qi somehow break through the protection of his armor and silently appear in his body. It directly exploded in his body, wiping out most of his life force and severely injuring him in an instant. That was not all. The sword qi that suddenly appeared in his body, after crushing his internal organs, actually went against the flow and directly rushed towards the nascent soul in his head. Wherever the sword qi passed, his body was completely minced into a bloody mess. No. At that moment, the battle-hardened Kuan Tian panicked. Fear even appeared on his face. This was because the sword qi was just too powerful and too fast. He used the dense energy within him to stop it, but the sword qi pierced through him. When he wanted to use other techniques, the sword qi was just too fast, so he was unable to stop it in time. Seeing how the sword qi was about to reach his soul, Kuan Tian gritted his teeth helplessly and immediately gave up on his body. His soul emerged, and without any hesitation, he flew towards the exit of the soul-destroying land as quickly as he could. At that moment, he had no time to think at all. All of his reactions were driven by instinct. It was as if this was the only path he could take at a time like this. This was an instinctive reaction that had been branded into the depths of his soul. Just how fragile are you now that you've given up on your body? Jianchen sighed emotionally. Since Kuan Tian had given up on his body, only death awaited him. Even the Dark Star Emperor could not save him, let alone the Dark Star Emperor. Even Grand Primes would die if they did not use their energy to protect Kuan Tian's soul. Die. Jianchen said gently. He did not seem to do anything, but Kuan Tian's soul that had already fled several dozen kilometers away produced a chilling cry before directly dispersing into thin air. Jianchen Supreme could envelop a range of 100,000 kilometers. Within that range, he could control everything like a supreme ruler. With a single thought, he could decide the fate of countless divine kings. This was because divine kings were unable to resist Jianchen's supreme will at all. If Kuan Tian still possessed his body, Jianchen Supreme would naturally be unable to do anything to him. However, he was so weak as a soul. Any divine king could easily destroy his soul. Jianchen could easily kill him with the power of the ultimate way of the sword. All he needed to do was generate sword qi out of thin air. Even if you die, I'll make sure you remain a confused ghost. Jianchen rubbed his face. Naturally, he had purposefully killed Kuan Tian using Defu's identity. He still did not understand the methods of the Dark Star race, so he obviously needed to make some preparations just in case. Afterwards, Jianchen arrived before Kuan Tian's corpse and removed his god artifact and sword without holding back at all. Kuan Tian's space ring naturally ended up on Jianchen's finger as well. Jianchen studied Kuan Tian's face and figure carefully. Afterwards, his appearance changed once again. In just a few seconds, he had become Kuan Tian's appearance. Not only did he change his appearance, but even his figure was the same. He basically seemed like another living Kuan Tian without any flaws. After destroying the corpse, Jianchen sat down on the ground and began refining the god artifact and sword. Chapter 2809. These two god artifacts should have been repaired, Jianchen thought to himself. God artifacts all possessed artifact spirit, but Jianchen did not discover any artifact spirit when he refined them. Moreover, he discovered that the two god artifacts showed signs of being repaired. This immediately made him think of the divine halls that hovered in the sky in the imperial capital of the Dark Star race. They were all damaged. Is there no expert who can forge new god artifacts in the Dark Star race? Or do they lack the corresponding materials? Jianchen thought. However, he soon chuckled. Why did he care about that? Would it not be better for him if the Dark Star race did not possess a complete god artifact? He immediately dismissed his thoughts and began to refine them with all his might. As Jianqin refined the god artifacts in the soul-destroying land, a huge group flew at a low altitude through the mist-shrouded Two-World Mountain in the distant direction of Dark Night City. They passed through the depths of the mist-shrouded Two-World Mountain and appeared on the outskirts where the mist was much thinner. There were a lot of them, at least several tens of thousands of people. All of them had energy surging around their bodies, forming an energy shield that enveloped them. And this energy, according to the different cultivation methods they cultivated, emitted different colors, intertwining with each other, as if forming an auspicious light. These people were the prodigies from the Saints' World who had entered Two-World Mountain under Jin Hong's lead. When they passed through the mist-shrouded region, the group seemed to discover something as well. All of them could not help but stop and study the surroundings. The mist has thinned out. The mist has thinned out. We're out. We're finally out. Ha 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 ha. We finally passed through the region of Two-World Mountain and arrived in the outskirts. We've succeeded. We've successfully passed through Two-World Mountain. In the next moment, many prodigies could not help but let out cries of joy. They were all overjoyed. They felt like they had just survived a disaster. They knew that as long as they left the depths of the Two-World Mountain, they would be truly safe. This was because no divine king realm, life-devouring beasts would appear in the outer regions of Two-World Mountain. At most, 1 or 2 peak over-god life-devouring beasts would appear. However, the life-devouring beast that was a peak over-god posed no threat at all before the several tens of thousands of god kings. We're finally out. Standing at the front of the group, Jin Hong could not help but let out a long sigh of relief. His heart, which had been in his throat for the past few months, had finally settled down. Nearby, He Qianshan of the Heavenly Crane Temple, Ping Yixing of the Emperor Lotus Sword Sect, Man Yunjun of the Darkness Clan, Guang Wanhua of the Crimson Light Clan, Sun Ji of the Sun Clan, Ing Wujin of the Darkness Clan, and the rest of the Sky Prides all had relaxed expressions on their faces. Ha ha ha, we're just too powerful. We're just too impressive. We actually made it through the Two-World Mountain. Originally, I thought it would be impossible for us to make it out, but I never thought we'd actually succeed. Ha ha ha, even the terrifying Two-World Mountain failed to stop us. We've completed an impossible mission. Once we return to our clans, our statuses will definitely rise. This is the most impressive achievement of our lives. Even when we face the test of our clans in the future, we'll gain quite a lot of points. Chu Jia of the Chu family, Gong Rui's of the Gong family, Zhou Ji of the Jade sect, Kong Feiying of the Cangchun clan, and so on, all sat down on the ground and laughed aloud. They were so nervous that they did not even dare to breathe too loudly in the depths of the Two-World Mountain. They were extremely fearful, but now that they had arrived in the outer regions that were much safer, they no longer felt any fear. They began to laugh out loud. However, none of them knew that in the depths of Two-World Mountain, several dozen kilometers away from them, there was a huge condor with its wings folded. It stood on the crown of a large tree and looked at the group of people from afar with eyes that seemed to possess some intelligence. As for the tree that the eagle was standing on, the entire tree was shaking and trembling in an extremely abnormal manner, as if it could not bear the weight of the eagle. However, upon closer inspection, it did not seem to be the case. Among Jin Hong's group, none of them knew just how much help the condor had provided them when they were about to make it out of the depths of the Two-World Mountain. After Jianqin left the Two-World Mountain, the condor had been secretly intimidating Jin Hong's group while they were making it out of the Two-World Mountain. It had scared away many divine king realm life-sucking beasts, which was why their journey was so peaceful. The condor stood on the crown of the tree and stared at Jin Hong's group silently for a while before spreading its wings and taking off. It vanished into the dense mist in the blink of an eye. Once the eagle left, the tree it was standing on seemed to have been pardoned. The roots that were rooted in the ground all broke out of the ground. Then, the roots carried the huge tree body as if the tree had grown countless legs and ran into the distance in a panic. All the prodigies of the saints' world who had entered the outskirts of the two-world mountain sat down with their legs crossed, absorbing the energy of the divine crystals to recover quickly. As he recovered, Jin Hong quickly began to make arrangements. He sent out groups of death warriors from different directions to gather information from the Dark Star race. However, they did not leave in a hurry after everyone had recovered to their peak condition. Instead, they continued to wait in the outskirts of the two-world mountain, 100 kilometers away from the depths of the two-world mountain. The Dark Star race will be suppressed once they enter the two-world mountain. They won't be able to unleash their full strength, so they won't enter the two-world mountain so easily. On the other hand, the two-world mountain's influence on us is much smaller, so let's not leave before we understand the situation in the 100 Saint City, Jin Hong said to everyone. No one objected to that. They all understood that remaining here would be slightly more beneficial to them. Afterwards, everyone sat in the two-world mountain and waited silently. He Chan sat nearby, but she clearly seemed rather absent-minded. She would check the divine hall in her hand from time to time, and she would always look in the direction of the depths of the two-world mountain. A sliver of worry appeared on her face. He Chan is the strand of soul that Yang Yutian left in the shrine still there? At that moment, the Emperor Lotus Sword sex prodigy, Ping Yixing, suddenly looked over and asked seriously. Ping Yixing's words attracted the attention of many people. Immediately, many prodigies looked over, and in the end, they all stared at the miniature divine hall in He Chan hand. Many of them understood that if it were not for Yang Yutian's valiant actions that drew away the divine king's life-devouring beast, many of them probably would have died in the two-world mountain. It would have been impossible for them to survive until now. Chapter 2810. Chu Jie and the others all came from peak clans in the Saints' world. Even though their statuses were not necessarily very high in their clans, and some of them were not even direct descendants, it still gave them a natural sense of superiority. As a result, they had always looked down on Yang Yutian, who was an independent cultivator. In the end, the independent cultivator that they looked down upon had actually heavily injured them in front of so many people. This was naturally an extraordinary humiliation to them, who were proud and arrogant. In their hearts, this humiliation had long since transformed into monstrous hatred. And this hatred was so strong that it wasn't inferior to a life and death enmity. Now that they heard Yang Yutian's name again, killing intent immediately burned in their hearts. However, they said nothing. They only stared at He Chan, or more accurately, they stared at the divine hall in He Chan's hand. He Chan constantly sensed the power of the soul within the divine hall with the senses of her soul. She noticed the gazes of Chu Jie and the others, so she understood the enmity between them and Yang Yutian. She immediately raised her guard and said to the people in the surroundings, "The power of the soul Yang Yutian left in the divine hall hasn't dispersed yet. He's still alive." He Chan spoke very gently, but everyone could still hear the sliver of worry and anticipation in her voice. Of course, they also understood that this did not mean that He Chan's concern for Yang Yutian had reached such a level. It was only because the strength that Yang Yutian had displayed had already reached a level that He Chan could no longer ignore. If he returned, it would mean that the group from the Heavenly Crane Divine Hall would become in existence only second to Jin Hong. No one could ignore them. Many matters in the two-world mountain were related to the interests of the clans behind them. The more powerful the group was, the more benefits they could obtain. Yang Yutian is still alive? That's fantastic. Looks like Yang Yutian is even more powerful than I imagined him to be. Not only did he successfully escape from a late divine king realm life-devouring beast, but he even managed to survive in the dangerous depths of the two-world mountain all by himself. We probably still have a great battle in the Dark Star race. If we can obtain the assistance of an expert like Yang Yutian, the pressure on us will decrease slightly. As soon as they heard that Yang Yutian was still alive, Ping Yixing from the Emperor Lotus Sword Sect, Sun Ji from the Sun family, and Baijian Xiong from the Baijian clan all lit up with joy. They became extremely excited. As for Chu Jie and the others, their faces became ugly. Afterwards, Kong Feiying and Gong Rui looked at each other. Kong Feiying said indifferently, "He Qian, the divine hall is in your hands, and we can't see what's going on in there. It's up to you to decide whether Jianqin is dead or not. Why don't you give the divine hall to us and let us confirm whether the strand of soul that Yang Yutian left behind really exists?" Kong Feiying and Gong Rui didn't even wait for He Qian's reply before making their move. Two silhouettes instantly dashed out, one of them rushing towards He Qian, while the other rushed towards the divine palace in He Qian's hand. "Gong Rui, get the divine hall and immediately destroy the strand of soul that Yang Yutian left behind. Without the soul to sense his location, he'll be blind in the depths of Two-World Mountain. He'll never be able to leave. All that awaits him is death," Kong Feiying said to Gong Rui secretly the moment he took action. Don't worry. I know what to do. However, it doesn't matter if we can't get the divine hall. As long as I can get close to it, I'll use my full strength to destroy the strand of soul that Yang Yutian left in there," Gong Rui snickered. "What are you doing?" He Qian had been on guard against them the entire time. As soon as Gong Rui and Kong Feiying took action, she reacted and immediately retreated. She was about to put the divine hall in her hand into her space ring as well. However, at that moment, a speck of cold light suddenly appeared. It arrived in front of He Qian with lightning-like speed. He Qian glanced around from the corner of her eyes and immediately saw Chu Jie, who had a trace of a strange smile on his face. In Chu Jie's hand, shockingly, he was holding a black cylinder the size of a hand. At this moment, it was emitting powerful energy fluctuations. The speck of cold light had shot out from the cylinder. Upon closer inspection, one could vaguely see that the speck of cold light was a needle-like object formed from energy pressure. With lightning speed, the cold light directly hit the temple in He Qian's hand that she hadn't had the time to put back into her space ring. Immediately, there was a violent explosion, and the temple was knocked out of He Qian's hand by the powerful shockwave, flying into the distance. "Chu Jie, He Qian will remember you," He Qian called out. She was extremely furious. Just when she wanted to take the divine hall back, she was stopped by Kong Feiying, who had arrived. On the other hand, Gong Rui moved like a bolt of lightning, directly charging towards the divine hall that had been thrown away. Energy surged from his body as he prepared to penetrate the divine hall with his powerful energy and disperse the power of the soul that Yang Yutian had left inside. "How dare you!" However, Jin Hong made his move. With a flash, he appeared in front of Gong Rui as if he had teleported. He calmly grabbed the divine hall with one hand and threw a punch at Gong Rui's hand that was about to hit the divine hall with the other. Bang! When the fist and palm collided, a muffled sound rang out. Gong Rui's face suddenly changed. He was sent flying by Jin Hong's punch, breaking several trees along the way. Only then did he stagger and land on the ground. His face was flushed, and he could not help but spit out a mouthful of blood on the spot. "Jin Hong, you want to stop us again and again? Aren't you afraid of affecting our unity?" With the divine hall in Jin Hong's hands, Kong Feiying stopped attacking He Qian. He glared at Jin Hong as he growled. His face was completely sunken. Although Jin Hong was the leader of this group, and their seniors had told them to follow Jin Hong's lead, their seniors had instructed them to listen to Jin Hong's opinion when it came to dealing with the Dark Star race. Their goal was to unite and face the threat of the Dark Star race together. Right now, they were only targeting Jianqin for personal revenge. Jin Hong had no right to interfere with that, and he was not going against the instructions of his seniors. Chapter 28:11. Gong Rui staggered to his feet after being blown away by Jin Hong's punch. He wiped away the blood from the corner of his mouth and bellowed at Jin Hong, "Jin Hong, don't slander me," who said, "We wanted to destroy the power of Yang Yuqian's soul in the Divine Hall. We just wanted to confirm whether Yang Yuqian had died in the depths of the Two-World Mountain or not. Instead, you suddenly attacked and injured me. Do you really think that my Gong family is easy to bully?" At this point, Gong Rui's aura suddenly changed. He abruptly turned around and shouted, "Where are the men of sacrifice loyal to my Gong clan?" With that, the presences of several hundred god kings erupted from behind him. The several hundred men of sacrifice from the Gong family all stood up and gathered behind Gong Rui's. It was also these several hundred sacrificial warriors that gave Gong Rui's great confidence. This was because they all knew the formations passed down from the Gong family. With several hundred sacrificial warriors, they could fend off first heavenly layer infinite primes. "Jin Hong, I've been sent into the world of the fallen beast by the clan. I represent our Gong family. You've attacked me fearlessly and even injured me. You've severely challenged the dignity of our Gong family. I can ignore what happened before, but if you continue to interfere with our matters, don't blame me for ignoring the bigger picture," Gong Rui said coldly. Now that he had emerged from the depths of the Two-World Mountain, he was already safe. He believed he no longer needed the help of others, so he naturally became confident. As for Jin Hong, although his identity as a Grand Exalt successor made him possess a great status, he had not matured to the point where the Gong family would take him seriously. If Jin Hong did not oppose him proactively, he would naturally show some respect. However, now that Jin Hong had injured him, Gong Rui obviously would not just swallow his anger. Jin Hong did not become angered by Gong Rui's arrogance at all. His expression did not change at all, but his presence became slightly more powerful. He said indifferently, "You want to ignore the bigger picture? Gong Rui, I won't threaten you. I just want to make one thing clear to you. If you really ruin our plans for your own personal matters, I will kill you without any hesitation." Jin Hong's words were direct and straightforward, with a resolute determination and a domineering aura. With that, not only did Gong Rui's expression change, but even the expressions of over half of the prodigies present changed as well. Over the past few months, all of them had gained some understanding of Jin Hong. As a result, they were extremely clear about Jin Hong's personality. They understood that Jin Hong was not a person who liked to boast. He was serious about everything he said. There was basically no falsehood in his words. Since he said he wanted to kill Gong Rui, it meant that he really had made up his mind. He was not just trying to scare them. Ping Yixing said as well, "Gong Rui's, don't forget your identity. If I remember correctly, the greatest backer of your lineage is a great elder of the Gong family. He's an 8th heavenly layer chaotic prime. Who knows how many great elders the Gong family has? But what's laughable is that even your ancestor can't represent the Gong family, so what right do you have to represent them?" Ping Yixing paused before continuing. "To put it bluntly, even if I kill you here, what can your ancestor do to me? Could it be that he still dares to kill me?" Gong Rui's face paled. He stared at Ping Yixing coldly. He only stared at him without saying anything. In terms of status, he was indeed no match for Ping Xingyi, as the greatest backer of his lineage was indeed a great elder of the Gong family. In the Gong family, even great elders had to listen to the arrangements of grand primes. However, Ping Yixing was the direct disciple of the current sect master of the Emperor Lotus Sword sect. The current sect master of the Emperor Lotus Sword sect might not have been very powerful, but his master was a grand prime of the Emperor Lotus Sword sect. Gong Rui's ancestor was an 8th heavenly layer chaotic prime of the Gong family, while Ping Yixing's ancestor was a grand prime. They were indeed incomparable in terms of status. Gong Rui alone is indeed not enough to deter you, but what if we join in as well? With that, Kong Feiying, Chu Jie, Zhou Ji, and Zhao Wenbin all stepped forward. They stood in a row with Gong Rui. More than half of the dozens of geniuses present were waiting to watch a good show. As for the personal grudges between Gong Rui's and Yang Yutian, as well as the confrontation with Jin Hong and the others, these geniuses were not interested in it and did not want to get involved. As a result, Gong Rui's group of 5 stood together, coupled with the Divine King's sacrificial warriors behind them. They really did form an organization that could not be underestimated. Jin Hong's expression didn't change. His gaze swept over Chu Jia, Gong Rui's, Kong Feiying, Zhao Wenbin, and Zhou Ji one by one. His gaze, which had always been calm, actually flashed with a cold light at this moment. He Qian, why don't you leave the divine hall to me for now? I'd like to see who's bold enough to take something from me. Jin Hong suddenly said to He Qian after a moment of silence. His voice had become rather cold. He Qian naturally would not refuse. She agreed to let Jin Hong take care of the divine hall. If she continued to keep it, Chu Jia and the others would insist on taking it. With just her strength alone, it would be difficult for 2 fists to fight against 4 hands. Furthermore, Jin Hong's tone made He Qian understand that he was angry. Jin Hong, who had always maintained a calm expression, was angry for the first time. Not good, not good, not good. Right at that moment, a voice filled with panic rang out. A sacrificial warrior who had gone out to scout hastily flew back. When he saw Jin Hong's group, he immediately said, "Not good, the 100 Holy City has been completely occupied by the Dark Star race. Our people stationed in the 100 Holy City have all been killed." That news was like a heavy bomb, shaking everyone's heart. All the prodigy's expression changed greatly. Although they already knew that something had most likely happened to the 100 Holy City, they did not expect it to be so bad. The 100 Holy City had been occupied by the Dark Star race, and all their people stationed in the 100 Holy City had been killed? Could it be that the Dark Star race was declaring war on them? This is impossible. We don't have much enmity with the Dark Star race. Why would they do this? Many prodigies were dumbfounded. They did not dare to believe such a fact. Although they were mentally prepared, they did not expect it to be so serious. Chapter 28:12. Following that, the men of sacrifice they sent out to gather information returned one after another, bringing back more and more news. The 100 Saints City has been sealed off, and no outsider cultivators are allowed to enter. Now it has become a paradise for the Dark Star race. Some of the people who were stationed in the 100 Saints City have escaped. Now the experts of the Dark Star race are hunting them down. The rest of the outsider cultivators have not been targeted by the Dark Star race. This time, the Dark Star race is only trying to exterminate our families. All of the Dark Star race's teleportation formations to the outside world have been closed, and no one is allowed to leave. The 36 cities of the Dark Star race have sent out notices to all of the survivors who have escaped from the 100 Saint City. The news came in one after another. Each piece of news was like a giant mountain that weighed down on the hearts of the Skype rides of the various clans. They were so heavy that they could hardly breathe. They thought that it was just a small conflict, and that they would be able to settle it quickly with their arrival. They did not expect it to be so serious that they had become the enemy of the entire Dark Star race. There was no place for them in the vast territory of the Dark Star race. Zi Xiaoji. At this moment, a cry of surprise and shock rang out. Several divine king men of sacrifice were leading several dozen outsider cultivators in tattered clothes. They were in a sorry state. In the crowd, a prodigy from the outside world, who had been keeping a low profile, suddenly jolted. He immediately stood up from the ground and looked at the rapidly approaching group. Young Master Hauren, young Master Hauchen. The next moment, the prodigy was overjoyed. He flew over excitedly and finally arrived before the 2 pale-faced youths who were clearly injured. Zi Xiaoji greets the 2 young masters. In the end, under the shocked gazes of the prodigies, he bowed deeply to the 2 divine king in front of him. Hauren? Hauchen? Are these 2 under Hao Jia's command? Many Sky Pride's eyes flickered as they looked at Hao Ran and Hao Chen with cautious gazes. The Hao Jia clan was a renowned, powerful clan across the entire Saints world. Even the clans behind them that they took pride in did not dare to offend Hao Jia. Zi Xiaoji, there's no need to be so courteous. Did the family receive our request for help and sent you here? Haoran helped Zi Xiaoji up and swept his gaze over the many figures that appeared hazy in the fog. His face was filled with excitement. Zi Xiaoji nodded and said, "Young masters, the outside world has already learned of the changes that have taken place in the world of the fallen beast. Many clans have already banded together. They've used up almost all of the 100 Calamity Divine King pills to nurture a large number of sacrificial warriors and sent them all into the world of the fallen beast." Good, good, good. This is fantastic. There's finally hope for the people trapped in the 100 Saints City. Haoran was overjoyed. He arrived before all the prodigies with a single step and said sternly, "Everyone, there must be a few of you who know me. However, the situation right now is extremely dangerous, so we don't have the time to catch up. There are still many people from our clans trapped in the 100 Saints City, and the 7th Hall Master has already passed down the order to execute all of them. There's no time to waste. We need to reinforce them immediately and take back the 100 Saints City that belongs to us. Brother Haoran, how are we supposed to fend off the entire Darkstar race with our strength? Even if we take back the 100 Saints City, we won't be able to defend it. After all, the Darkstar race has many primordial realm experts," Guang Wanhua said from the side. Guang Wanhua, from the Crimson Light clan, said with a troubled expression. Clearly, he had known Hao Ran and Hao Chen for a long time. "The situation isn't as bad as you think. We haven't reached the point where we have to become enemies with the entire Darkstar race. It's just that the 7th Hall Master has been targeting us on purpose ever since he took over. As long as we can take back the 100 Saints City, we'll be able to contend with the 7th Hall Master. After all, we've been operating in the Darkstar race for so many years. It's not like we didn't have any plans," Hao Chen said solemnly. "Are you counting on the 2 Vice Hall Masters of the 9th and 10th Sacred Halls? If you can count on them, the 100 Saint City wouldn't have fallen to such a state today," He Qian suddenly said. Many of the prodigies had been given some top-secret information in the world of the fallen beast, so it would be easier for them to move around in the Darkstar race. This included some of the upper echelons that the 100 Saints City had bribed in the Darkstar race. The 9th and 10th Sacred Halls each had a Vice Hall Master secretly supporting the 100 Saints City. Although the Darkstar race's ruling power changed every 1,000 years, the other 9 Sacred Halls could not interfere when one Sacred Hall was ruling. However, a Vice Hall Master's words still carried a lot of weight in the Darkstar race. Even if they couldn't directly interfere, their words could still influence the decision-makers to a certain extent. We can't blame them. The 7th Sacred Hall's actions were simply too fast. On top of that, we didn't have enough strength in the 100 Saints City. It led to us losing the 100 Saints City very quickly. Without the 100 Saints City, we no longer have the right to speak. However, it's different now. With everyone's support, our strength can no longer be underestimated. Once we take back the 100 Saint City and unleash the might of the 100 Saint City, we'll be able to hold on for several months, even if we're facing the attack of the 7th Sacred Hall. At that time, if the Vice Hall Masters of the 9th and 10th Sacred Halls help us from the side, we'll have hope of overcoming this crisis. Taking a step back, even if the higher-ups fail, as long as we take back the 100 Saint City, we'll be able to leave the Darkstar realm through the teleportation formation set up in the 100 Saint City. Hao Ran carefully analyzed the situation for everyone. "Everyone, you've just left the Two-World Mountain. I'm afraid you don't know the current situation of the Darkstar race. Now, all the teleportation formations leading to the sacred immortal realm have been sealed. If we want to leave this place, we can only take back the 100 Saint City. The 100 Saint City is our only way out." Behind Hao Ran and Hao Chen, another divine king stood up. He was a member of another large family. He had met up with Hao Jia in the Two-World Mountain. "Since that's the case, Let's set off immediately and take back the 100 Saints City. Jin Hong shouted and immediately made a decision. No one objected to Jin Hong's decision. The geniuses who had just passed through the depths of the Two-World Mountain did not want to turn back. The 100 Saints City was their only safe way out. Thus, they had to take it back. Soon after, the large group began to gather. Some of the representatives of the large families hiding in the sacred halls were also called out by Jin Hong. Everyone formed dozens of formations. Vaguely, there were signs of them forming various formations. They began to move towards the 100 Saints City in an orderly manner. Within the Soul Destruction Land, Jianqin, who was sitting cross-legged on the ground, slowly opened his eyes. He looked at the two god artifacts floating before him that were emitting a faint pressure. A satisfied smile appeared on his face. I've finally refined it. Although this sword is not as handy as the 9-star Sword of Heavenly Ways, my battle prowess has increased quite a bit with this sword in hand. Jianqin murmured. With a thought, the two god artifacts floating before him immediately turned into 2 streaks of light that shot into his body and disappeared. However, I have to wear the god armor at all times. Although I can disguise myself as Kuan Tian, it's only my appearance. I can't change some internal things. Once I'm injured and bleed, I'll be exposed. My blood is different from the blood of the Dark Star clan. Jianqin thought. The god armor that he had just refined immediately appeared and enveloped his entire body, leaving only his eyes exposed. Afterwards, he began to walk around the Soul Destruction Land. He carefully checked to see if he had left any traces behind for the last time. After confirming that no one would be able to find any traces, he walked towards the exit of the Soul Destruction Land. As he approached the exit, the energy in his body suddenly surged. The power of the laws of the sword gathered around him, and he began to attack his surroundings without a target. Immediately, a deafening boom rang out in the quiet soul-extinguishing land again. Jianqin attacked the surroundings without any rhyme or reason as he flew towards the outskirts of the soul-destroying land. When he left the region of the soul-destroying land, his presence suddenly erupted, sweeping through the surroundings like a tidal wave. Even more powerful laws of the sword gathered, erupting loudly in the surroundings. It was almost enough to shatter the sky. The sky rumbled and the ground shook. Jianqin unleashed his strength without any restraint, causing an earth-shaking disturbance that spread far and wide. In the end, Jianqin sent out waves of sword qi to bombard the surroundings. Suddenly, his body tilted and he collapsed on the ground. He closed his eyes and did not rise again. At the same time, the 7th Hall Master sat on the throne with his eyes closed in the distant imperial capital of the Dark Star clan. He seemed to be cultivating. Suddenly, his tightly shut eyes opened and his figure disappeared from the throne, reappearing outside the temple. His deep eyes looked in the direction of the Soul Extermination Land, revealing a look of surprise. This presence, is it Kuan Tian? The light in the 7th Hall Master's eyes flickered, and his face rapidly sank. At the same time, people silently appeared in the other divine halls as well. They all stared in the direction of the Soul Destruction Land as their faces changed. Chapter 28:13. What powerful pulses of origin energy! This has already exceeded the range of the 5th heavenly layer. It has truly reached the domain of the 6th heavenly layer. Kuan Tian stayed in the soul-destroying land for 3 years. I never thought he would actually break through in the end. A white-robed, middle-aged man hovered before a divine hall. For primordial realm experts followed behind him. He was the hall master of the 2nd divine hall in Urna. He was also a 6th heavenly layer infinite prime. So what if he has broken through? He stayed in the soul-destroying land for 3 years. In the history of our Dark Star race, no one has stayed there for so long apart from emperors. We all understand extremely well just how terrifying the damage to the soul is in the soul-destroying land. I hope Kuan Tian doesn't suffer any problems because of this. Otherwise, even if he breaks through now, he'll probably be stuck here forever. There won't be any room for improvement in the future, said the seventh divine hall master. He did not get along with the fifth hall master, Kuan Tian, in the first place, so he naturally would not say anything nice to him. Behind the leader of the seventh hall, the two vice leaders, Enlai and Kaiser, walked out of the divine hall as well. They also looked in the direction of the soul-destroying land. Enlai immediately chuckled when he heard the leader of the seventh hall. He said, "The fifth hall master has released his presence in the soul-destroying land for no reason, and there's even a sliver of chaotic origin energy. In my opinion, that's not normal at all." Perhaps the palace master's guess was right. Although the fifth palace master successfully stepped into the sixth heavenly layer, he must have paid a certain price. Even his primordial spirit was injured. Vice Palace Master Enlai's words had simply struck the heart of the seventh Palace Master. He could not help but reveal a gloating smile on his face as he unhurriedly said, "If his primordial spirit is truly injured, then it will be troublesome. In our Dark Star realm, natural treasures that can help one's primordial spirit are already scarce, much less precious items that can heal one's primordial spirit. Once this genius Kuan came out of the soul destruction land, he immediately unleashed his aura and even used his source energy, making it seem like he was in a great battle. This is clearly too abnormal." Speaking of this, the seventh hall master's eyes gradually lit up. At first, he was only targeting Kuan Tian verbally, but the more he spoke, the more he felt that it made sense. This was because Kuan Tian's current behavior was indeed extremely inconsistent with his usual personality. Could it be that I was right? The seventh hall master thought to himself. His eyes grew brighter and brighter, mixed with a hint of excitement and anticipation. "And like Kaiser, let's go. Let's go take a look." The seventh hall master led the two vice hall masters towards the soul extermination land. After the seventh hall master left, the remaining hall masters stood in front of their respective divine halls. Light flickered in their eyes. There was also a trace of complexity within them. Could something really have happened to Kuan Tian? Our race is about to undergo a grand ritual. Once it succeeds, the suppression from the grand exalt of the wood spirit race will weaken once more, and we'll have a chance at reaching the chaotic prime that we've always dreamed of. If Kuan Tian is injured in the soul-destroying land, it'll severely affect his future breakthroughs. He might even lose his position as hall master if the people below him overtake him, and Na said with some concern. Second hall master and Erna said worriedly. He had a good relationship with fifth hall master Kuan Tian, so he didn't want to see Kuan Tian fall into such a situation. In the next moment, Ana directly made his way to the soul-destroying land with a single movement. He wanted to personally check on Kuan Tian's situation. After Ana's departure, another two hall masters hurried towards the soul extermination land. The remaining 5 hall masters only stayed for a while before returning to their own divine halls. They no longer paid any attention to the matter. Outside the soul-destroying land, the 3 deputy hall masters of the 5th divine hall quickly arrived outside the soul-destroying land. Behind them were 2nd hall master and Erna, 7th hall master Jiadi, 8th hall master Sunran, and 10th hall master Feng Shui. They led several deputy hall masters and followed behind the 3 deputy hall masters of the 5th divine hall unhurriedly. Clearly, they intended to let the 3 deputy hall masters of the 5th divine hall come into contact with Kuan Tian first. Something really did happen in Kuan Heaven. The 7th hall master's lips curled into a faint smile when he was still a distance away. This was because he had discovered that Kuan Tian had clearly fainted outside the soul extermination land with the senses of his soul. He immediately took pleasure in Kuan Tian's misfortune. Hall Master. The 3 vice hall masters of the 5th divine hall came to the unconscious Kuan Tian one after another. Their expressions changed, and they were filled with anxiety and uneasiness. Anyone could tell that something was wrong with Kuan Tian's current appearance. When they thought of the uniqueness of the soul extermination land and the surrounding environment that was destroyed by Kuan-Tian, they were certain of one thing. Although Kuan-Tian had successfully broken through in the soul extermination land, his primordial spirit was also greatly affected. It was even possible that his primordial spirit was injured. This was because the soul extermination land injured the primordial spirit. If something happened to Kuan-Tian, the status of the fifth divine hall would plummet. Without the support of the Hall Master, the 3 Vice Hall Masters would be inferior to the other 9 divine halls in the future. They would not be able to stand up straight. Therefore, the 3 Vice Hall Masters of the 5th Divine Hall were the most anxious when something happened to Kuan-Tian. Let me check where Kuan-Tian is injured. The 8th Hall Master came in front of Kuan-Tian and reached out to check. Wait. The 10th Hall Master, Feng Shui, appeared in front of Senator. She was a woman who looked to be in her 40s. Although she looked middle-aged, she was still charming. Time had not left many traces on her face. Feng Shui stopped Sun from checking on Kuan-Tian and said, "It's best that no one touches Kuan-Tian in his current state. It's very likely that he has injured his primordial spirit. This is very tricky to deal with. Let's bring him back to the Divine Hall first." Next, the unconscious Kuan-Tian was brought back to the Divine Hall by a Vice Hall Master of the 5th Divine Hall. The 2nd, 8th, and 10th Hall Masters followed him into the 5th Divine Hall. The 7th Hall Master did not follow them. Instead, he returned to his 7th Divine Hall in a happy mood. He had confirmed that something had happened to Kuan-Tian's breakthrough, which made him very happy. In the 5th Divine Hall, a Vice Hall Master took out a jade bed and placed the unconscious Kuan-Tian on it. He then took a step back and stood with the other 2 Vice Hall Masters. The 3 of them were frowning. It was obvious that their hearts were heavy. To one side, the 2nd and 10th Hall Masters were stern as well. The 2 of them clearly had some friendship with Kuan-Tian, so they were currently discussing how to treat him. The Dark Star race did not have a way to treat injuries to the primordial spirit. As a result, the 3 Vice Hall Masters were rather helpless when faced with Kuan-Tian, whose primordial spirit was clearly injured. They did not know what to do, so they did not dare to act rashly. The 8th Hall Master, on the other hand, had a calm expression on his face. His gaze swept over Kuan-Tian's body with great curiosity. Immediately after, a very obscure force spread out from his feet and penetrated the hard ground of the Divine Hall. Without the 2nd Hall Master and the 10th Hall Master noticing, it quietly approached the jade bed where Kuan-Tian was lying. It quickly burrowed into the jade bed and slowly approached Kuan-Tian, who was lying on it. Jianqin, who had disguised himself as Kuan-Tian, had actually been awake the entire time. He had been observing his surroundings the entire time. The 2nd and 10th Hall Masters did not notice the 8th Hall Master's actions, but he had sensed it long ago. It's about time. It's time to wake up. Jianqin knew that he could not continue like this, as he sensed Sen's obscure probing power getting closer and closer to him. If he really was probed, all his efforts would have been for naught. Jianqin's eyelids trembled slightly before he slowly opened his eyes. The Hall Master is awake. The Hall Master is awake. The gazes of the 3 Vice Hall Masters of the 5th Hall had never left Jianqin. As a result, they immediately discovered Jianqin's actions. The 2nd and 10th Hall Masters, who were discussing how to treat Kuan-Tian, stopped their discussion at this moment. They both looked at Kuan-Tian. Jianqin's awakening made Sun Ran, who wanted to investigate, give up. He sighed in his heart and said regretfully, he actually woke up at this time. Unfortunately, it's too late. My head hurts. As soon as he opened his eyes, Jianqin's face revealed a pained expression. His face instantly turned pale. He hugged his head tightly with both hands and rolled off the jade bed. He half knelt on the ground and hit the jade bed with his head, making dull thumping sounds. Hall Master. What's wrong with the Hall Master? Maybe he stayed in the soul-extinguishing land for too long and was affected by the remnant consciousness of the star beast The three vice hall masters of the fifth hall looked at each other. They stared blankly at Kuan Tian's abnormal behavior and seemed to be at a loss. After a long while, Kuan Tian finally calmed down. His expression revealed a hint of exhaustion, and he looked extremely weak. He sized up the crowd with a blank gaze and asked with a face full of doubt, "Who are you?" When the hall masters of the 2nd, 8th, and 10th halls heard those words, they immediately shuddered inside. They were stunned at first, before disbelief filled their faces. "Kuan Tian, you don't remember us?" The 10th hall master stared at Kuan Tian with a face full of shock. Kuan Tian scratched his head. The confusion on his face deepened. He muttered to himself, "Kuan Tian? Who is Kuan Tian? Strange, why does it sound so familiar? It's as if we've known each other before." Then he looked at the 3 hall masters in front of him again and said, "You haven't told me who you are. Also, where is this place? Why am I here?" The 2nd palace master and the 10th palace master looked at each other and fell silent. The 8th hall master glanced at Kuan Tian deeply. Suddenly he let out a long sigh and said, "It looks like Kuan Tian has already lost his memories. Although he has successfully broken through to the 6th heavenly layer, the price for that is quite high." There was no need for Sun Ran to stay any longer. With that he turned around and left. "Hall Master, don't you remember us? I'm Bing Yuan." "Hall Master, I'm Ta Luo. Think about it carefully." "You should remember me." "Hall Master, I'm Do Wujin. Have you forgotten? You once said that I'm the strongest general under your command." The 3 vice leaders of the 5th hall all spoke up. They struggled to believe this. The leader was a 6th heavenly layer infinite prime. So how could he lose his memories so easily? Chapter 28:14. "Kuan Tian, have you forgotten about me as well? Think about it carefully and try your best to remember." Feng Shui said rather sorrowfully. She struggled to believe that Kuan Tian had lost his memories just like that. This was because this was the Dark Star world. The Dark Star world was not a complete world. It was only a miniature world created from an astral beast. The various cultivation resources produced here were nowhere near as plentiful as the Saint's world. As a matter of fact, some special heavenly resources could not be cultivated in the Dark Star world due to the environment. As for natural treasures that could aid one's primordial spirit, they were extremely lacking in the Dark Star realm. That was because it was simply impossible for such natural treasures to be produced in this place. They could only rely on martial practitioners from the outside world to bring them in. All the heavenly resources that could be brought in were extremely limited in quality. As a primordial realm expert, regular heavenly resources were no longer enough to satisfy Kuan Tian. Feng Shui was naturally extremely worried about Kuan Tian's recovery. Afterwards, the 2nd hall master, and Erna, the 10th hall master, Feng Shui, and the 3 vice hall masters tried various methods to make Kuan Tian recover some of his memories, but they were all extremely disappointed in the end. This was because they realized that the 5th hall master, Kuan Tian, had completely lost his memories. Other than the soul-extinguishing land, he really couldn't remember anything else. He had even forgotten the things that had left the deepest impression on him. The people in the hall all sighed when they saw this. Originally, the 2nd and 10th hall masters wanted to properly celebrate Kuan Tian's successful breakthrough, but they could only give up on that now. The 2 hall masters did not stay for too long. They left very soon. With their departure, only Bing Yuan, Ta Luo, and Do Wujin remained in the spacious hall of the 5th divine hall. Jianchen lowered his head in thought as Kuan Tian, disguised as Bing Yuan, Ta Luo, and Do Wujin all stood there without saying anything. This was because the hall master before them had lost all his memories. They had no idea what to say. "Were the 3 of you my subordinates in the past?" It was still Jianchen who broke the silence first. He did his best to pretend that he did not know anything. At the same time, he acted like he did not know anything as he asked the 3 of them, "Yes, Palace Master. In the Dark Star race, All of the vice hall masters had to obey the orders of the hall master. As such, they were considered subordinates. Hall master? What was going on with this palace master? Why don't you tell me about my past? I don't remember anything. Jianqin said in distress. Bing Yuan, Ta Luo, and Dou Wujin glanced at each other. Then, the three of them began to talk about Kun Tian's past. They spent a long time talking about everything they knew about Kun Tian, big and small. This was especially true for the few events that they believed to be of extraordinary significance to Kun Tian. They explained them in great detail in an attempt to stimulate the hall master and awaken his forgotten memories through some of the events that were deeply engraved in his mind. However, their thoughts were destined to be in vain. From them, Jianqin managed to obtain some useful information. One of them was that other than the 7th hall, the 4th hall had always been at odds with the 5th hall. He also managed to deduce from some clues that the 10th hall master, Feng Shui, had a rather ambiguous relationship with the 5th hall master, Kun Tian. Of course, Jianqin was not Kun Tian himself, so he had no idea what Kun Tian's relationship with Feng Shui was, or to what extent their relationship had reached. Moreover, he learned that the Dark Star race possessed a treasure trove that only primordial realm experts knew about. This treasure trove was actually a place where heavenly resources were planted. It was also known as a medicinal garden in the outside world. All of the upper echelon of the Dark Star race viewed this medicinal garden as their greatest treasure. Even the Dark Star Emperor had personally participated in the construction of the medicinal garden, expending a tremendous amount of resources to cast down an extremely powerful defensive formation in the distance. And what's the deal with the blood? I feel like the blood doesn't belong to my race. With a flip of his hand, Jianqin took out 15 droplets of essence blood from Kun Tian's space ring. The appearance of the essence blood made Jianqin feel intense killing intent and fury again. However, he concealed it very well, not showing it at all. Just Kun Tian possessed 15 droplets of essence blood, while the Dark Star race had 10 hall masters. Without even thinking about it, the other 9 hall masters definitely possessed Siyu's essence blood. Siyu did not even possess a lot of essence blood. Now that he had lost so much essence blood, Jianqin began to worry deeply for Siyu's safety. Moreover, 12 of the 15 droplets of essence blood on Kun Tian had been completely converted. Siyu's presence could no longer be sensed from the essence blood. Instead, it was shrouded by the heavy presence of the Dark Star race. It was as if the essence blood had become an item of the Dark Star world, engraved with the mark of the Dark Star race. Hall Master, this is the essence blood of a divine beast. The Emperor personally took action in the past, capturing a divine beast from the outside world. The Emperor once said that the power of the bloodline within the essence blood of the divine beast is extremely great, and it will be extremely beneficial to our sacrifices. The 3 Vice Hall Masters really did not hold back at all. They answered all of Jianqin's questions in great detail. When they felt like Jianqin did not understand something, they would take the initiative to explain it to him without even needing Jianqin to ask. This was because the 3 of them firmly believed in Kun Tian's identity. They did not doubt him at all. As a matter of fact, they did not even suspect him. This was because the Hall Master before them was a true primordial realm expert. Various signs pointed towards Kun Tian, who had just broken through to the 6th heavenly layer. There were only a few dozen primordial realm experts in the Dark Star race, and they were extremely familiar with every single one of them. Moreover, 6th heavenly layer infinite primes were all Hall Masters. As a result, it was impossible for someone to impersonate them. As for the cultivators of the outside world, it was impossible for them to think of this no matter how fantastical they were. A divine beast? Jianqin immediately became interested when he heard that. He acted like he did not know anything and asked the 3 Vice Hall Masters carefully about what the divine beast was. In the end, he said, "Where is the divine beast imprisoned? I suddenly want to go take a look." The 3 Vice Hall Masters looked at each other and smiled bitterly. Dou Wujin said, "Hall Master, The divine beast has been personally imprisoned by the emperor, and the emperor is in seclusion. I'm afraid it won't satisfy the hall master's desire to take a look. Moreover, the hall master has seen the divine beast in the past. There's nothing interesting about it. It's just a slightly powerful but pitifully weak demonic beast. Moreover, the emperor has tossed away too much of the divine beast's essence blood. It's already on the brink of death, and it's only managed to stay alive with a few heavenly resources. In order for the divine beast to survive until the day of the ceremony, the emperor probably won't release it so easily. Jianqin became slightly relieved when he heard that. His greatest worry was that Siyu had already died and he would not be able to save him. However, it seemed that even though Siyu had lost too much essence blood, his life would not be in danger until the day of the ceremony at the very least. It would be fine as long as he could stay alive. Once he was alive, he would be able to recover no matter how severe his injuries were. At this moment, Jianqin's expression changed. He could sense that a medallion in Kun Tian's space ring had suddenly begun to vibrate violently and release a bright light. At the same time, Bingyuan, Taluo, and Dou Wujin's expressions changed as well. A similar medallion appeared in their hands. The medallion also vibrated violently and released a bright light. It's a warning from the formation. Something has happened in the medicinal garden. Judging from the intensity of the warning, it's nothing trivial. The expressions of the 3 Vice Hall Masters changed slightly. Dou Wujin immediately clasped his fist at Jianqin. Hall Master, something has happened in the medicinal garden. We need to hurry over immediately. Then let's go. Without any hesitation, Jianqin immediately stood up and left the 5th hall with the 3 Vice Hall Masters. He had already learnt from the Vice Hall Masters that the Dark Star race treated the medicinal garden as their most precious treasure. He just happened to want to check it out. When Jianqin emerged from the 5th hall, he could not help but glance past the other 9 halls. He discovered that it was not just the 5th hall. All the Vice Hall Masters and Hall Masters of the other 9 halls had appeared as well. They all headed towards a teleportation formation in the square. Chapter 28:15. When Jianqin looked at them, many of the leaders and vice leaders of the 9 divine halls looked at Jianqin as well. 2nd Hall Master and Erna and 10th Hall Master Feng Shui had complicated expressions on their faces. 7th Hall Master Deity, on the other hand, had a mocking smile on his face as he gloated. Most of the remaining leaders and vice leaders were emotionless. They did not show too much emotion. Clearly, Kun Tian's amnesia was no longer a secret among the 10 sacred halls of the Dark Star race. Almost everyone knew about it. Their reactions were exactly the same as the 3 vice leaders of the 5th Divine Hall. They did not doubt Kun Tian's identity at all. Instead, they found it to be completely normal. This was because they were well aware of how terrifying the land of soul destruction was. Kun Tian had stayed in there for as long as 3 years. If his soul was still intact, it would instead appear abnormal. This was because even they did not dare to stay in the soul-destroying land for so long. Their souls were unable to endure the constant attacks of the astral beast's will. Kun Tian's soul was injured, which was why they found it to be completely reasonable. Kun Tian, I wonder if you remember the past? Do you still remember who I am? Do you still remember who you are? The 7th Hall Master, Deity, did not forget to mock Kun Tian as he approached the teleportation array. His face was full of smiles. Behind Jianqin, the 3 vice leaders, Bingyuan, Taluo, and Dou Wujin, all had ugly expressions. They were all from the 5th Divine Hall, so they were embarrassed to be mocked among the leaders. However, the great difference in status and strength made them feel powerless before the leader of the 7th Divine Hall. Jianqin looked over. Behind the leader of the 7th Divine Hall were 2 vice leaders. They were 3rd and 4th Heavenly Layer Infinite Primes. Moreover, there was a 2nd Heavenly Layer expert who had yet to return from Anya City. On the other hand, Bingyuan was the weakest of the 5, a 1st Heavenly Layer Infinite Prime. He was followed by Ta Luo, a second heavenly layer infinite prime. Do Wujin was the strongest at the fourth heavenly layer. In terms of strength, the seventh divine hall was indeed stronger than the fifth divine hall. Of course I know you. You're the lord of the seventh shrine, Deity. But I heard that you've always been against me. Jianqin did not back down and looked at him with a sneer. He was straightforward and did not beat around the bush. Ha ha ha, you're wrong. Why would I go against you? Deity laughed and looked down on Kuan-Tian. His expression showed that Kuan-Tian was not qualified to go against him at all. However, Kuan-Tian, you seem to have gained a lot of confidence after breaking through to the sixth layer of heaven. Ha ha! Amidst the laughter, Deity led the two vice palace masters into the teleportation formation and disappeared with a flash of light. The hall masters and deputy hall masters from the surrounding 8 great divine halls watched this scene with indifferent expressions. They were already used to the small conflicts between the 5th and 7th halls. In reality, it was not just the 5th and 7th shrines. Even the remaining shrines were not on good terms with one another. It was not like they did not fight openly or covertly. However, these conflicts could only be regarded as small conflicts. They would only erupt in a small area. There would never be situations like battles to the death. Jianqin had learnt a little about this from the 3 deputy palace masters. Jianqin stared at where Deity had vanished from and smiled mysteriously. He thought, in the past 1,000 years, Deity has been in charge of the Darkstar race, and the large-scale operations against the cultivators of the outside world and the attacks on 100 Saint City were all led by Deity alone. It looks like I should make good use of my identity as Kuan-Tian. Jianqin's mind began to churn rapidly. The light of divination would flash through his eyes from time to time. It was extremely obscure. He had purposefully hidden it such that no one could sense it. After all, it was relatively easy for him to hide something from infinite primes with his current strength. As he pondered, Jianqin entered the teleportation formation with Bing Yuan, Ta Luo, and Do Wujin. As the teleportation formation lit up, the 4 of them vanished as well. Jianqin had already left the royal capital through the teleportation formation. He had arrived at an unknown place in the Darkstar world. As soon as he was teleported there, Jianqin sensed extremely dense origin energy. The origin energy did not belong to the Darkstar world. Instead, it completely belonged to the Saints' world. The Darkstar world and the Saints' world were 2 completely different worlds, so the energy there was naturally different as well. The people of the Darkstar race were unable to absorb the energy within divine crystals to cultivate, while the cultivators from the Saints' world were unable to absorb the energy of the world either. They had to rely on the divine crystals they carried with them to recover. Now that he was in an environment filled with origin energy, Jianqin really did feel like he was in the Saints' world. He studied the surroundings. He did not see anyone from the other 9 halls. All he saw were various plants that thrived. Every single one of them pulsed with powerful energy. They were all evolving towards becoming heavenly resources. As a matter of fact, these plants had already become heavenly resources. It was just that they were too young, so their quality was not high. Suddenly, powerful pulses of energy appeared from behind Jianqin. The 3 vice leaders who had come with him all struck out. They used the energy as blades and cut the surrounding heavenly resources to pieces. With the 3 primordial realm experts working together, all the heavenly resources that Jianqin could see had been cleaved clean in a short while. As a result, the lush green sea immediately turned into a barren plain. Jianqin looked back at the 3 of them in question. The 3 vice leaders knew that their leader had forgotten about everything, so one of them immediately explained, "Leader, the garden is nearby. As we're too close to the garden, the energy of the garden has seeped out, which is why these plants have grown so quickly. However, as long as these plants exist, they will constantly absorb the energy of the garden. As a result, in order to prevent the energy from going to waste, the plants on the outskirts of the garden need to be cleaned regularly." Jianqin came to a realization. These plants, and even some of the medicinal ingredients that had already evolved into heavenly resources, were only weeds in the eyes of the Dark Star race. He could not help but expand the senses of his soul. Very soon, he found the other 9 leaders in different directions. At the same time, he saw the so-called Garden of the Dark Star race. The medicinal garden of the Dark Star clan was actually a circular territory that spanned 100 kilometers across. The entire territory was enveloped by a powerful formation. Dense light flickered within the formation. The energy there was extremely dense, having already condensed into mist. There were even droplets of energy that had formed within the mist. Occasionally, there would even be a drizzle of pure energy. The energy in this medicine garden had already reached a very shocking level. There were a total of 10 teleportation formations in the surroundings of the garden, which corresponded to the 10 divine halls. The region where the 9 other divine halls resided was originally lush with vegetation, but now it had all been reduced to a flat piece of land. Only a thick layer of powdered plants covered the ground, giving off pulses of energy. Formations operated in the depths of the ground, absorbing the energy from the powdered plants and feeding it back into the garden. Fruit of ways. There's actually a fruit of ways here. Suddenly, Jian Chen's heart shuddered. He could clearly see a small tree in the center of the garden with the senses of his soul. It was shrouded in mist energy. The tree was only as tall as a person, but there was a thumb-sized fruit on its crown. Jianchen had only read about the fruit of ways in a few ancient records back in the saint's world. This was the first time he had seen it in person. This was because the fruit of ways was extremely rare in the saint's world. Even in the eyes of a few primordial realm experts, it was a legendary item. At the same time, it was extremely precious, so precious that even peak organizations with grand primes would fight over it. This was because the fruit of ways was extremely effective. It did not nurture energy, but the ways of the world. It was said that once consumed, the fruit would produce the ways of the world for the person to comprehend. Jianqin also remembered that the ancient records in the saint's world stated that anyone who consumed the fruit would have an 80% success rate at breaking through. Moreover, what was even more impressive was that the fruit was not only effective on infinite primes and chaotic primes, but it was also effective on grand primes. Once a grand prime ingested the fruit, they would have an 80% chance of breaking through a minor realm of cultivation. The only flaw was that grand primes had far too high of a requirement on the quality of the fruit of ways. The Tao birth fruit is a divine grade heavenly treasure. Similarly, divine grade heavenly treasures are divided into different grades: low grade, mid grade, high grade, and supreme grade. Low quality reproductive fruit of ways is only effective on cultivators below the primordial realm. Mid quality reproductive fruit of ways is for infinite primes. High quality reproductive fruit of ways is for chaotic primes, and supreme quality reproductive fruit of ways is only effective on grand primes. Chapter 28:16. The value of a high-grade childbirth fruit of ways was indescribable because a high-grade childbirth fruit of ways was enough to nurture a chaotic prime. Of course, that was under the premise that they had reached the 9th heavenly layer of infinite prime. A high-grade childbirth fruit of ways had an 80% chance of allowing a 9th heavenly layer infinite prime to become a chaotic prime. Chaotic primes were existences on the level of ancestors in many large clans and sects in the saints' world. They were experts who watched over a region. Of course, even if they were chaotic primes, high-grade childbirth fruit of ways would still be effective on them. However, the increase in strength would not be a major cultivation realm, but a minor one. In the saints' world, every minor increase in cultivation after becoming a chaotic prime would be extremely arduous. It would take a long time for them to settle down. As a matter of fact, some people would remain at that level for the rest of their lives if they did not encounter great, fortuitous encounters. However, the various difficulties they faced when breaking through could be easily resolved with a high-grade childbirth fruit of ways. It could save them countless years of arduous cultivation. So the value of a childbirth fruit of ways was evident. So the childbirth fruit of ways is undergoing a metamorphosis. It requires an extremely tremendous amount of energy to undergo the metamorphosis. And if the energy is depleted too quickly, it will trigger a warning from the formation. Do Wu Jin stared at the depths of the garden from behind Jianqin as he muttered to himself. Our Dark Star race has nurtured this childbirth fruit of ways for so long, and has finally reached high grade. Since the childbirth fruit of ways is about to ripen, we should speed up the ceremony. It's just a pity that we can't wait for such a precious item to reach supreme quality. If it does reach supreme quality, the laws it nurtures will undergo a qualitative change. Supreme quality? Don't be so sarcastic. Basically, all of the power of our Dark Star race has been used to nurture this childbirth fruit of ways to reach high grade. As for reaching supreme quality, we're nowhere close to being able to do that with our race's ability. We can only nurture it to supreme quality if we send it to the Saints' world and use the abundant resources there. The three Vice Hall Masters discussed with each other behind Jianqin. However, their gazes towards the Tao-bearing fruit were calm, without the slightest ripple. They were far from being as excited as Jianqin. All of them knew that the Tao-birth fruit belonged to the Dark Star Emperor alone. No matter how precious it was, it had nothing to do with them. Since the fruit of ways is so precious, my clan must have paid a very great price to trade for it, right? Jianqin stood with his arms behind his back. He had his back to the three of them as he asked very casually. Hearing that, Bingyuan, Taluo, and Do Wujin smiled ambiguously. One of them said, Hall Master, before you lost your memories, you couldn't help but sigh whenever you talked about the Tao-bearing fruit. You said that the Tao-bearing fruit was a gift from our ancestors, that it was the mercy of the great Tao, that it was the blessing of fate. Oh, there was such a thing? I don't remember anything. Jianqin was rather surprised. He continued, Tell me the details. Taluo opened his mouth and said, Palace Master, this Tao birth fruit was not something we obtained from a cultivator in the outside world. In fact, given how precious the Tao birth fruit is, those large families in the outside world would definitely view it as a precious treasure and would not exchange it with us no matter what. As for the method we used to obtain it, it is indeed somewhat inconceivable. They were found in the space ring of an over-god from the outside world who disobeyed the rules, said Jianqin. However, we only obtained a seed in the beginning. The people below us did not recognize the Tao-bearing seed at first. They only sensed that it was extraordinary, so they handed it to their superiors. In the end, the Tao-bearing seed was handed over one by one, and only then did it enter our sights. Afterwards, the Emperor recognized it. Ever since then, our Dark Star race has basically used everything we have to nurture the Tao-bearing seed. The environment of our Dark Star race is not suitable for the growth of the Tao-bearing seed, so we exchanged for a large amount of precious earth from the Saints' world from cultivators in the outside world. Our Dark Star race does not have the energy needed for the Tao-bearing fruit to grow, so we exchanged for a large number of divine crystals from cultivators in the outside world. We used formations to draw out the energy within the divine crystals and created a medicinal garden that was the same as the Saints' world. Although there are various heavenly resources from the Saints' world planted in the medicinal garden now, and some of them have even reached the level of God tier. This medicinal garden only appeared because of the Tao-bearing fruit. It's good that it's ripened. The Tao-bearing fruit is basically a beast that devours everything. In order to nurture it, our Dark Star race has to exchange for a large number of colored divine crystals from cultivators in the outside world every year. If we convert those colored divine crystals into supreme grade divine crystals, we'll consume over 10 million supreme grade divine crystals every year when we nurture the Tao-bearing fruit. It took us more than 60 million years to nurture the Tao-bearing fruit from a seed back then to what it is today. Jianqin was left speechless when he heard that. He was shocked by the amount of resources the Dark Star race had to invest. In order to nurture the Tao-bearing fruit, the dark star race would consume over 10 million supreme grade divine crystals every year. Yet the Tao-bearing fruit had been nurtured for over 60 million years. That was an extremely shocking amount of wealth. This amount of wealth was even several times more than what Jianqin had obtained when he wiped out the peak organizations on the cloud plane in the past. The dark star race really is willing to pay any price to nurture the Tao-bearing fruit, thought Jianqin. However, he also understood that the dark star race faced great difficulties when breaking through due to their special environment. The Tao-bearing fruit was far more important to them than the saint's world. Afterwards, Jianqin carefully observed the medicinal garden. He discovered that, aside from the Tao-bearing fruit, there were also a large number of heavenly resources planted in the garden. These heavenly resources were all unique to the saint's world, and many of them had already reached the God tier. When they were brought in by the cultivators of the saint's world, they were all at the God tier because only those below God tier were allowed to enter the dark star world. Afterwards, they were nurtured by the dark star world, resulting in the appearance of God tier heavenly resources. Hall Master, this medicinal garden is divided into a total of 11 regions. The central region, where the Tao-bearing fruit is planted, belongs to the Emperor. As for the 10 regions surrounding the central region, each of the 10 divine palaces will occupy one of them. We can plant all kinds of natural treasures in our own regions as we please. In other words, all the heavenly resources in the region before us belong to our 10th hall. Jianqin scanned the region before him with the senses of his soul before losing interest. There were indeed some God-tier heavenly resources in the medicinal garden that belonged to the 5th hall. The dark star race treated these heavenly resources like treasures, but they were nothing to Jianqin. Chapter 28:17. The entire garden is split into 11 regions. Each region is separated by formations. The formations in the regions that belong to the 10 halls can block attacks from 6th heavenly layer infinite primes, or even 7th heavenly layer infinite primes. The central region of the garden has the strongest defenses. Even 9th heavenly layer infinite primes will need to expend quite a lot of effort to get through it. However, although the formations are powerful, they've all been cast down in the same way as the saint's world in order to prevent the energy from leaking out. All the energy the formations absorb is supplied by divine crystals. Once the divine crystals run out, or if the formations can't keep up with the rate at which they consume energy, they'll collapse no matter how powerful they are. Jianqin stood outside the garden as he studied the formation carefully with the senses of his soul. Gradually, a smile appeared on his lips. He had already calculated that although the formation in the center of the garden could block attacks from 9th heavenly layer infinite primes, it clearly could not last for too long. As a matter of fact, from the way the formation was set up, its rate of energy absorption could not keep up with the rate at which it consumed energy from the attacks of a high-level infinite prime. As a result, the formation would only be able to withstand a few heavy attacks before it collapsed due to the lack of energy. After all, this was the dark star world, not the saint's world. If it were the saint's world, some high-level formations could even constantly absorb energy from the sea of stars to replenish themselves, allowing them to operate without exhaustion. Without overwhelming strength, it would be extremely difficult to break through forcefully. The energy required to break through to the next level is extremely tremendous. It's several hundred times or even 1,000 times more than usual. We'll probably have to pay a huge price this time. Dou Wujin, who stood behind Jianqin, felt pained when he sensed the rate at which the energy in the garden was being consumed. Normally, we basically only come here to replenish divine crystals once every 10 years. But at this rate, we'll probably need to replenish it once every 10 days. Who knows how long it'll take for the fruit of Tao to reach high quality? Bing Yuan said bitterly. Let's not talk about this for now. The energy in the herb garden can only last for a few hours. Let's quickly replenish our divine crystals. With a wave of his hand, a large pile of divine crystals appeared out of thin air. They piled up into a small mountain in front of him. Most of these divine crystals were supreme grade divine crystals. There were also a few colored divine crystals. Almost all of them were one-colored or two-colored. If all of them were counted in terms of supreme grade divine crystals, there would be at least 100 million of them. Afterwards, Do Wujin and Bing Yuan took out all the divine crystals they had in their space rings. The energy replenishment of the garden, once every 10 years, was personally carried out by the Vice Hall Masters of the various divine halls. As a result, the three of them all carried quite a lot of divine crystals on them, which was enough to replenish the garden once at the very least. Genshin also looked through Kuan Tian's space ring when he saw this. When he had first obtained Kuan Tian's space ring, he had discovered that there were a large number of divine crystals stored in it. They were all piled up in an inconspicuous corner like a pile of trash. Genshin had found it strange back then. He did not understand why an expert of Kuan Tian's level would carry around a pile of divine crystals that were completely useless to him. He had no use for cultivating, and there was no need for him to condescend to trade with cultivators in the outside world with his status as a hall master of one of the 10 divine halls. However, Genshin now understood that Kuan Tian's divine crystals were also prepared for the herb garden. Moreover, when he extended the senses of his soul, he discovered that it was not just Kuan Tian. Even the hall masters of the other 9 divine halls carried large amounts of divine crystals with them. Afterwards, Bing Yuan took action. He opened a formation eye and tossed all the divine crystals into it. With the replenishment of energy, the formation in the eye of the formation immediately began to operate madly. It extracted the energy from the divine crystals at an extremely fast speed. Apart from a small portion that was used to maintain the formation's operation, the rest was poured into the medicinal garden. The Tao breeding fruit also seemed to possess a certain level of intelligence. When it sensed that the energy in the herb garden had become sufficient, its rate of absorption immediately increased once again. This led to a ferocious energy storm in the herb garden. The Tao birth fruit was plundering the energy of the entire herb garden. It was like it had turned into a giant suction cup. Not only was it absorbing the energy of its own area, but it was also absorbing the energy of the other 10 areas that belonged to the 10 hall masters. The Tao birth fruit didn't hesitate to absorb the energy of the entire herb garden. The rate at which the Tao breeding fruit absorbed energy increased once again. As a result, the divine crystals that could last for 10 days could only last for 5 days. Sensing this, the 3 vice hall masters behind Genshin and the 9 hall masters in the other regions all became extremely stern. Oh no! The rate at which the Tao breeding fruit absorbs energy during its advancement has completely exceeded our expectations. The divine crystals we've stored up over the years probably won't be able to last for very long. The senses of the souls of many primordial realm experts intertwined in the air above the herb garden as they communicated with one another. I don't know how long it will take to complete the Tao-bearing fruit's advancement. Based on the rate of consumption, all the divine crystals in our 10 great temples can only last for a month or so. After that, we can only watch helplessly as the Tao-bearing fruit's advancement fails. If the advancement of the Tao-bearing fruit fails, the entire tree will be destroyed. Hence, this advancement must succeed. I'm going back to the temple immediately and have my subordinates purchase divine crystals with all their might. This was the voice of Jia Di, the Lord of the 7th Hall. Yeah, let's go back quickly. We need to exchange for some divine crystals as well, or our herb garden will probably wither away. The hall masters of the 10 divine halls began to return with their vice hall masters. At the same time, an armored divine king of the Dark Star race stood before the teleportation formation on the huge square of the 7th divine hall in the imperial capital of the Dark Star race. He waited for the hall master to return. The divine king was a general that the 7th hall master Deity, had sent to the 100 Saints city. Beside the general were a few divine kings who held positions in the 7th divine hall. General Guan, what has happened in the 100 holy city? Why do you need to personally report to the hall master? A god king who held an official position in the 7th divine hall smiled gently. However, the divine king referred to as General Guan was in no mood to chat with them. He only stared at the teleportation formation in a hurry and asked, "When will the hall master return?" General Guan, don't be in such a hurry. The hall master usually doesn't go out for too long, so he should return very soon. As soon as this person finished speaking, the teleportation array in front of them suddenly emitted a blinding light. The 7th hall master, Deity, appeared on the teleportation array with 2 deputy hall masters. The hall masters of the other 9 divine halls had returned as well. Chapter 28:18. Deity, who had just left the teleportation formation and was about to make his way to the 7th divine hall, could not help but come to a halt when he heard that. He narrowed his eyes as a playful smile gradually appeared on his face. He said, "They really are stubborn. I've already ordered the teleportation formation to be shut down, so they can't receive any reinforcements from the outside world. I never thought that the remnants of the 100 Saint City would still be able to gather a force under such terrible circumstances. Moreover, this force can even threaten the army I've stationed in the 100 Saint City. It looks like they're not weak." Deity was at ease. His voice was filled with disdain. He did not take the cultivators of the outside world seriously at all. But that's fine too. We can use this opportunity to clean up all the organizations that have taken root in the 100 Saint City. Although our Dark Star race needs some cultivators from the outside world to connect the 2 worlds, we only need some unaffiliated cultivators or cultivators who don't have too great of a backing. That's because it's easier to manage cultivators like that, and they're easier to obey. It's not like the 100 Saint City. Just because they have grand primes behind them, they're all extremely arrogant. They even work together to try and stand up to us. These people are the most unstable factor in our Dark Star race. They're the biggest tumors. We need to get rid of them. As he said that, a seal suddenly appeared in Deity's hand. General Guan, take this seal to the camp and get the assassin army to reinforce the 100 Saints City. The mission I'm giving you this time is to clean up all the remnants of the 100 Saints City in a single stroke. This time, you must do your job beautifully. Don't let this hall master hear of any fish escaping the net. Otherwise, you generals will have to come and ask for punishment yourselves." Deity said with a stern expression. Towards the end, his tone became stern. The Dark Star race possessed a total of 10 armies. Each army was composed of over 10,000 cultivators, and even the weakest was an overgod. Each army was split into 10-person squads, 100-person squadrons, and 1,000-person armies. Among them, a divine king in the initial stage could only be the captain of a 10-man team. A divine king in the middle stage could be the captain of a 100-man team, and a divine king in the late stage could be the captain of a 1,000-man team. Even though they were only at the peak of the divine king's realm, as the highest commander of an army, their battle prowess was not at all inferior to that of a city lord. Just a single legion of the Dark Star race possessed 1,000 divine king realm experts. In the Saints' world, even the elites nurtured by some peak organizations would struggle to fend them off. This was because there were only a handful of peak organizations that possessed over 1,000 divine kings in the Saints' world. Perhaps they possessed more primordial realm experts than the Dark Star clan, but not a single organization possessed more divine kings than the Dark Star clan. That was because the Saints' world was a world filled with various powers. It was filled with conflict and slaughter. Even primordial realm experts would die frequently, let alone the divine king. On the other hand, even though the upper echelon of the Dark Star clan would struggle both openly and secretly, they were all limited to a certain extent. There would not be any internal strife. As time went on, The Darkstar clan naturally produced an extremely large number of divine King Realm experts. Jia Di, the 7th Hall Master, thought that it was more than enough to send the Absolute Killer Legion to reinforce the 100 Holy City. However, when General Guan heard this, his expression turned bitter. General Guan mustered up his courage and clasped his fist towards Jia Di with a bow. Hall Master, the remnants of the 100 Saint City are unimaginably powerful. They have already gathered several tens of thousands of divine King Realm experts and are currently attacking the city. If Vice Leader De Fu had not arrived in time, the city probably would have ended up in the hands of the cultivators from the outside world. Jia Di's eyes widened when he heard that several tens of thousands of divine King Realm experts had gathered. He was shocked. What did you say? The remnants of the 100 Saint City have gathered several tens of thousands of divine King Realm experts? Even the number of divine King Realm experts from the outside world who have entered our Darkstar clan is nowhere near that many. General Guan, are you sure you're not trying to fool me? Hall Master, it's absolutely true. However, the divine King Realm experts seem to have been nurtured by the 100 Calamity Divine King Pill, as I've discovered that the divine King Realm experts only possess strength and no corresponding laws, said General Guan. Jia Di frowned. In other words, the several tens of thousands of divine King Realm experts are all sacrificial warriors from the outside world. However, what I don't understand is that the teleportation formation at the entrance has clearly been sealed off. So how did the cultivators from the outside world get here? Did they pass through the Two-World Mountain? The light in his eyes flickered for a while before he swung his sleeve. He turned around and walked towards the teleportation formation again. At the same time, he said, the Divine King's sacrificial warriors from the outside world all possess a combination formation. When they work together, they can even erupt with the strength of a first heavenly layer infinite prime. Since so many Divine King's sacrificial warriors have appeared in the 100 Saint City, De Fu probably won't be able to suppress them with his cultivation at the second heavenly layer. Kaiser and Lai, you two come with me to the 100 Saints City. The two Vice Hall Masters, Kaiser and Anlai, nodded and followed Jia Di to the teleportation array. However, just when Jia Di was about to step into the teleportation formation, there was a flash. Jianshin's figure suddenly appeared and happened to block Jia Di's path. Jia Di's footsteps paused. He looked at his old rival standing in front of him, and his eyes immediately became unfriendly. He growled, Kuan Tian, what are you doing? Get out of the way. If it were any other time, Jia Di definitely would not forget to give Kuan Tian a hard time. However, the 100 Saint City was in danger right now, so he did not have the time to waste on Kuan Tian. Jia Di, don't be in such a hurry to leave. I just happen to have something I want to talk to you about, Jianshin said with a fake smile. Jia Di frowned and said rather impatiently, what is it? I vaguely remember some past events. Jia Di, you seem to have borrowed a large number of divine crystals and various heavenly resources from me in the past. Do you still remember that? Jianshin said. Jia Di became furious when he heard that. He called out, you're full of nonsense. Kuan Tian, is your head really that bad? When have I ever borrowed anything from you? Get out of my way immediately. You can't bear the consequences of delaying my matters. At this moment, the three vice leaders of the 5th Hall, Bing Yuan, Ta Luo, and Do Wujin, flew over as well. They all stood behind Jianshin as doubt filled their faces. Humph. I clearly remember that you borrowed a lot of resources from me before. Jia Di, are you trying to renege on your debt? Jianshin refused to budge. He stared straight at Jia Di as if he would not give up until Jia Di returned his resources. The three deputy hall masters of the 5th Hall looked at each other blankly. In their memories, there was no mention of Jia Di borrowing resources from Kuan Tian. Moreover, with the relationship between the 5th Hall and the 7th Hall, even if the 7th Hall really lacked something, it was impossible for them to borrow it from the 5th Hall. Hall Master, did you remember wrongly? We only remember that you lost a lot of things in a bet with Hall Master Jadi. But we didn't know that Hall Master Jadi had ever borrowed resources from you, said Daoujin. Chapter 2819. Jiadi's face suddenly turned cold, and his gaze became extremely sharp. He knew that Kuan-Tian's soul had been injured in the soul destruction land. Therefore, he did not pay much attention to Kuan-Tian's request to borrow something that had never happened before. After all, Kuan-Tian's brain was not in a good condition, and he had lost all his memories. It was not unforgivable for him to remember some things wrongly. However, Kuan-Tian's last sentence, which was full of threats, was a huge blow to the 7th Hall Master, Jadi. If it was some trivial matter, Jadi, who was in a hurry to rush to the 100th Saint City, would not bother to fuss over it. However, Kuan-Tian's threatening words were no longer a trivial matter, but a major matter that concerned the dignity of the 7th Hall Master. Kuan-Tian, I didn't expect you to become so arrogant after breaking through to the 6th heavenly layer. But then again, you don't remember everything that happened in the past. Naturally, some of your past experiences have been wiped clean. It seems that I should make up for your past memories. The corners of Jiadi's mouth curled into a cold smile. A powerful aura slowly rose from his body, as if a sleeping beast was about to awaken. Jianchen, who was disguised as Kuan-Tian, was worrying about how to stall Jadi. Seeing that Jadi had taken the bait so easily, he could not help but be secretly delighted. He immediately struck while the iron was hot and said angrily, "It seems that you really don't want to return it. In that case, don't blame me for being impolite." As soon as he finished speaking, Jianchen took the initiative to attack. He was wearing Kuan-Tian's god artifact armor. He grabbed at the air with his right hand. An array of sword chi immediately condensed out of thin air. It shone brightly and directly pierced towards Jadi. The energy of this ray of sword chi was completely restrained and did not leak out at all. Clearly, it was perfectly controlled by Jianchen. In this way, even if the sword chi was defeated in the battle with Jadi, it would not produce too strong of an energy aftershock and would not affect the surrounding buildings and environment. The consequence of this was that Jianchen could only use less than 50% of his strength. This was because it was the only way he could preserve his strength and prevent the energy from spreading. Otherwise, if they were to use their full strength, the shock waves from the battle could destroy the heavens and the earth, and most of the imperial city would be destroyed. Jiadi's expression was calm. He was looking forward to this battle because Kuan-Tian was now a 6th heavenly layer expert and was no longer a 5th heavenly layer expert. As his old rival, he naturally wanted to find out his opponent's strength and see how much Kuan-Tian had improved. Suddenly, Jiadi's body glowed with golden light. A powerful law of metal enveloped him, making him look like he was made of gold. Immediately afterwards, he struck out with a fist. His fist shone with brilliant golden light, completely turning into gold, becoming incomparably sturdy. Moreover, within this dazzling golden light, there was a scorching flame hidden within. These were the laws of metal and the laws of fire. Clearly, Jadi had spent an extremely long time comprehending these two laws. Even though his cultivation remained at the level of a 6th heavenly layer infinite prime, his usage of laws, control over power, and purity of origin energy had all reached the apex. As they were afraid that their attacks would affect the surroundings, the two of them held back. They did not even use half of their strength, so it was naturally impossible to tell who was stronger. After a casual clash, Jadi stopped and retreated. He said to Jianchen coldly, "It's difficult for me to use my skills here. Kuan-Tian, if you have the courage, come with me." With that, Jadi turned into a blur and shot off into the distance with great speed. He vanished into the horizon in the blink of an eye. Jianchen could not help but smile when he saw this. He thought, Jin Hong's group has gathered the disciples of several dozen peak organizations in the Saints' world. Their Divine King's Death Warriors are equivalent to several dozen 1st heavenly layer infinite primes in a formation. This force is more than enough to take back the 100 Saints City. The only thing they lack is time. I only need to keep Jia Di busy for 4 hours, and we should be able to take back the 100 Saints City. Gentian turned into a streak of light and pursued in Jia Di's direction as he thought that, "Let's go. We'll go as well." We can see just how great the difference is between the leader and leader Jia Di after breaking through, said Dou Jin. Bing Yuan and Ta Luo's eyes were filled with excitement and eagerness. After nodding to each other, they immediately pursued. With their departure, only Kaiser and Enlai remained before the teleportation formation of the 7th Hall, as well as General Guan and the others who had come to ask for help. General Guan looked anxious. The situation in 100 Saints City was urgent, and they really couldn't delay any longer. Now that Temple Master Jia Di had left, General Guan had no choice but to ask for help from the 2 deputy temple masters, Karso and Enlai, hoping that the 2 deputy temple masters could immediately rush to 100 Saint City. There's no time for that. General Guan moved the absolute killer army to the 100 Saints City first. The battle between the leader and the leader of the Kuintian Hall is more important. Kaiser, let's go, Enlai said. He ignored General Guan's pleading expression and immediately left with Kaiser. This was the first battle between Kuintian Hall and Jia Di after breaking through to the 6th heavenly layer. It was extremely significant, so Enlai and Kaiser naturally would not miss it. They did not take the 100 Saints City seriously at all. In their eyes, there was not much difference whether the 100 Saints City was in the hands of the cultivators of the outside world or the Dark Star race. It would not affect their interests, and it posed no threat to the Dark Star race. As for attacking the 100 Saints City, it was all because of Jia Di's deep enmity with the cultivators of the outside world. At the same time, the 100 Saints City that was extremely distant from the royal capital was filled with the flames of war. A devastating battle that was enough to shake up the entire world was taking place there. The level of the battle had completely reached the level of the primordial realm. A battle of this level was basically unprecedented for the Dark Star race. It was rare to come across a battle like this. Several thousand divine King Deathsworn had already charged onto the lofty walls of the 100 Saints City. They were currently engaged in an intense battle with the cultivators of the Dark Star race. Energy boomed and shook the sky. Powerful ripples of energy formed a violent storm that wreaked havoc on the walls of the 100 Saint City, causing the walls to shake from time to time. If it were not for the fact that the 100 Saint City was constructed from supreme quality saint artifacts, making it extremely tough, it probably would have collapsed long ago from the intense battle. Under the attacks of the divine King Deathsworn, the cultivators of the Dark Star race who guarded the 100 Saint City were forced to retreat. They suffered extremely heavy casualties. This was because the forces of the Dark Star race that guarded the 100 Saint City were equivalent to 10 armies at most. There were only around 1,000 divine King Realm experts among them. However, they faced several dozen peak organizations from the Saints' world. Every single organization possessed several hundred to over 1,000 divine King Deathsworn. The disparity in strength was just too great. In particular, when the divine King Deathsworn stood in formations, they could erupt with the might of a first heavenly layer infinite prime with their combined strength. The Dark Star race had suffered a crushing defeat. The battle outside the 100 Saint City was even more intense. The vice leader of the 7th Hall, De Fu, was surrounded by over a dozen huge balls of energy.